So it is 7:04 on October 17th, 2018, and I'm calling the Board of Health meeting to order. We have one variance hearing, and then we have a number of other items on the agenda, but there are also a couple of items to be added, possibly to be added, as not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of the meeting. So the two items are, and then we can vote whether we want to amend the agenda. 59 North Main Street, a construction management plan, and then ZBA petitions for hearings on October 29th. And does anyone have anything else that they would like to add? Okay. Do we have a motion to amend the agenda with these two items?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So, which one should we, well, we could continue our EMF discussion. Since all right.
Oh, wait. What's that? Oh, wait. Oh, you know what? Watch out.
Okay, so we received an email from someone who is concerned about the next generation of wireless broadcasting at higher frequencies, which is the 5G system. And there are just questions about EMF radiation and the effect on folks in town. Let's see if there's anything else to pull out from here. So, it's, all I can say is it's a very complicated topic. There's a lot of conflicting information and opinions over whether it is or is not dangerous.
The biggest problem is that time is what's going to tell.
Yes, time will tell, and certainly,
Right, but everything's got risk in life, and it's all about relative risk. And I would contend that based on wave energies, things like ultraviolet radiation, even microwave radiation, compared to the typical doses that I think people receive, and the wave energy, you correct me when I'm wrong, because he's the physics guy, that from a person, when you take all those factors into account, I would put this on certainly the lower end of concerns that I, as a person, have. And I think if people are really concerned about cell phone risk, they can make a lot of personal choices about how they use it, and downloading large files and trying to use it in places where there's poor connectivity, which actually causes energy surge, delaying giving their children cell phones.
Having the kids not sleep with it under their pillow.
Exactly, yeah.
That's probably a greater.
I know, so there's certainly
a
a lot of personal choices I think people can make that can probably limit their dose, but I just say, based on all the literature that I have read, I haven't seen anything empirical and compelling enough with human equivalent doses to indicate that there's any sort of significant health concern at this point in time.
So my comment would be relative to the physics. The device is putting out a few watts of broadcast power when you're transmitting. When it's just sitting here receiving, is almost none. If you have it like this, right, like millions of people do, yes, it's exposing your cells to RF radiation. There's no compelling evidence that I've seen either that RF radiation at this level is dangerous to anybody. The real question is, if you have a transmitter that's 100 feet away, or 500 feet away, and it's putting out 10 watts, 50 watts, there's a thing called the inverse square law that applies here, right? So the power density that you'll see at your head, unless you climb up the pole and put your head next to the transmitter, is smaller than this. So it's hard to see. Now, that said, I agree with what you, I did a quick look through the literature sometime in the last week, and there's some studies that are funded by one side that have some non-conclusive evidence and some from the other side, but it's not ionizing radiation. If it put out 100 watts or 1,000 watts of RF, I'd be nervous. If the thing on the pole put out 10,000 watts, but it's not, it's 10.
And even then, I mean, studies obviously are going to need to be done, and people are paying attention, but then we still won't be able to differentiate the data because there are so few people without cell phones that are in
The control
proximity
group.
to a pole or whatever, to an emitting center, that
Right.
it would be really hard to differentiate those populations.
The power line running down the street
Yeah.
radiates RF, okay? The power line that's a few miles away from you, the big giant one that goes parallel to Western Avenue, puts out a lot of RF. And there've been a lot of controversies over people living next to them, and I never see anything that settled it one way or the other.
Right.
So,
It doesn't mean that it isn't true.
Right.
It just means it's hard to quantify.
I think it is hard, so I'll weigh in since I had to research this extensively for years with a client
you.
in the
good.
telecommunications business. So their own engineers who were developing these products were concerned about what they might be exposed to. And I'd have to say, there were a lot of studies that could be done and not find anything of particular concern, but I also know from working with the engineers who specialized in this that they would do testing, and if they moved the monitoring device by an inch, they could get something that was 100 times the level of 1 inch over, and that just has to deal with there's more of an average assumption about the waves that are going out, but in reality, it's not evenly distributed. And if you have more than one source, the waves can sort of add together, or they can cancel each other out, or something in between. So it's not so clear-cut, and the one study that was done strictly by a research or government institution in Sweden found a correlation with cell phone, and as you say, if you're holding it to your head, but a definite correlation with tumors. Whether they were
Association, not correlation,
carcinogenic.
association. There's a difference. I mean, from a toxicology.
Something that they felt was worthy of attention, and there, in Europe, it actually is much more accepted as being an issue. And there are things that folks can do. I always use Ethernet cable, because everyone's sitting with their laptop right above them. There is a distance, it is R squared, but you really need to be at
1 over
least
R
20,
squared.
well, 1 over R,
The inverse, right.
so, you
very
need,
important.
yes,
The
yes.
opposite, if it's R squared, 1 over R squared, it goes down with the square of the distance. R
Yes,
squared, it would
sorry.
go up. So that's critical.
Okay, sorry, I just, shortcutted it. But in any case, 20 inches minimum to be away from something. So there are differences of opinion. I think it's difficult. I know that the state is working on something, because even though you can say folks have choice, kids in schools don't necessarily have a choice. It's bathing them every day, and there are certainly a lot of people who are concerned about that, and there are people who are sensitive to it. So and that, they know. So there is some portion of the population who can't handle it. So I don't see it as clear-cut as you might, as a lack of concern, and
I wouldn't say lack of
And-
concern.
I would
I'm not
sort of say,
compelled.
I think in a world full of concern, it's where in the hierarchy.
It's
it
relative
sets it.
risk.
Yeah.
It's about, so
right, but
that's
it's a
what I'm
risk. I
saying.
think what people are concerned about is it's one that they have no control over whether they take it or not, and that's the issue with
They
the
do have
5G.
control.
No,
You can get
if
rid
you
of your
live
cell
where there,
phone.
if you live in a town where there are 5G towers and devices, you have no choice but to have an exposure that you don't want. I don't know that we are going to be able to buck that. I think we need to wait and see what the Department of Public Health comes out with, because they were trying to work on something, and it might only be at the school level, but it has been worked on for, I think, a year or so now. So we may see something, and then we could just follow from there.
And our school prohibits, use during class, and I think, having, well, they
But not
allegedly.
on their phone, not on their laptops, and there's constantly, kids have their laptops open and are receiving information, and they're getting texts from the teachers in the middle of class about
So
stuff.
the laptops are, if you're using it in Wi-Fi mode, yeah, it's got a radio in it. I have to look up to see what the power level difference is, but an educated guess would be it's 10 to 100 times less, simply because the range of Wi-Fi is meters, and this can reach to a cell tower. For example, the Verizon cell tower in Sherborn is in the Unitarian Church steeple, right? I can barely reach it on Western Avenue, and that's, call it 2-3 miles in a straight line, right? So power level is far higher than Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a trickle, it's milliwatts.
But it sounds like in terms of where we stand as a board, it sounds like there's discussion, a sort of absence of clear, settled data, some guidance from the state, but our sort of general impression is there's insufficient data for us to act independent of the state regulation or guidance based on that sort of conflicting information. So it sounds like something for us to kind of stay aware of and stay tied into what the state's doing, but probably nothing to independently act on or regulate from currently available information. Does that kind of
Yeah.
feel like a fair summary
Yes,
of where
And
people
we're
are
all
at?
interested.
Yeah.
But the problem is,
So stay
we all are
tuned, I
trained
guess,
to,
right?
listen
Stay
quickly, which
tuned.
makes it
No pun
even harder.
2.4 gigahertz.
Not- I'm-
So let's go to something non-controversial like
And
deer
it's-
I'm
management.
worried about the cell phones in bed. I'm thinking,
Right, I don't even like sitting,
Deer
I turn
management?
mine
I'm worried about a
off.
nuclear
I
war
don't like
Canada.
even sitting with people who have them, because I don't want them. So,
I'll give it-
in any case. Okay, so where, let's see. Okay, so there was a presentation last week that someone from Mass Fish and Wildlife came in to talk about deer management issues. So he's a biologist and has studied deer extensively throughout his academic career and professional career. And basically, there are too many deer, and too many from the standpoint that they're decimating various plant species is one issue. There are few wildflowers left, because that's something that they really like to eat, and that affects pollinators. And so his general discussion was about, well, actually just interesting things about deer life cycle and habits and what have you, and research that's been done, but also on the issue of how to manage and whether the town would be interested in managing deer. So there was discussion on that. I think they were getting the presentation provided, his presentation, which had a lot of nice data and graphs and
I had a
charts
conflict.
and maps.
Was it heavily attended?
It was reasonably attended, and interestingly, I didn't think it would necessarily, and it was a small sample, but most of the people there seemed interested in deer management of some sort. So, and then, of course, I thought for us, the link is.
Live.
Yes, exactly, so.
Yeah. Did that come up? I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the problem is we can't get rid of
Except
the.
deer are not the only
Right,
vectors
right,
for
the problem is
Lyme.
vector.
So we got like the mice and the
Yeah.
Yeah.
woodchucks and the.
So there was some discussion. So that's not the only answer, but really from a balanced ecosystem, aside from us and our impacts, that the deer have a, big impact on it as well. But anyway, so I won't repeat all that here, but there should be some posting, I believe, on the Conservation Commission webpage on that. Or maybe I should ask, so is the board I don't know, do we think we have a role in this, or weighing in, or yes, we'd like to do something about Lyme, but
I'd want to control the deer because they keep eating my wife's hostas, but I'm not sure that I can make a compelling Lyme case for it.
Did
think that Lyme is
they, I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
attend, did they say, with this much reduction in a local deer population, we're seeing
no, they did not make any kind of correlation that way.
The problem is the mammals they're all vectors, and, but I think that Lyme is really important, and I think that it's something of great interest, and maybe we should just organize an informational session, maybe that, a community,
Yep.
that might be something that would be well-received, like this, or maybe we could even have speakers. There's a lot of,
That's what
there's
Dover's
actually,
has done.
yeah, and there's actually quite a bit of, it's complicated, and unfortunately, it's more complicated by the lack of, there's a little bit of controversy within the medical community as well, and the presentations of the condition vary so much from patient to patient. It's really, there's a lot to talk about.
So, well, if you'd like to take that on.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay, good. It'll have to be in the winter.
okay. Let's see, mounding study? Were you able, did he respond to any edits that you sent?
Uh-oh, wait, I might have forgotten
Oh,
to
okay.
do that.
All right. So the update is that we'll update it next time.
So I'll add it to the next
I
agenda.
missed it. What was this one?
I think I was supposed
The
to send him the final edits.
Yeah,
I
you
just-
found
I've been-
something that, a few typos or something else.
Yeah. My bad, sorry about that.
Okay. Well,
I
good.
was very
This is
focused on my PFAS.
moving right along.
presentation. Send along.
I think I'd like to wait for Silverwood from Mark.
So,
Anything new on ledge disruption?
Nothing
I
from
want to
me.
thank you for all of your work.
Go on. You're welcome.
And ironically.
Oh, I want to talk about, yeah, there is one thing I want to say. Go
Oh,
ahead.
so you know how you spent a lot of time with Kernan, right? From
Yes,
New Hampshire
Brandon
DS.
Kernan
Right.
in New Hampshire, correct.
Right, so I was presenting at the NAWIA conference on Monday at UMass Lowell. It was all about PFAS and how they're
Oh.
affecting wastewater treatment plants and municipalities and biosolids, and so it was a very interesting day session, and there was a short session on regulatory updates, and he was there. And I meant to go thank him for giving so much time and I think productive discussion with you, but I ran out of time and people were swarming him, so he's kind of a rock star, but.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because New Hampshire's really been at the forefront on PFAS and developing regulations and doing monitoring and also looking into things like surface water and bioaccumulation. And so, I mean, they have a lot of impact because of the number of private wells that they have also in New Hampshire. So, and they have manufacturing, which we don't really have as much of that, but they have Saint-Gobain and TCI, so.
So on the subject of ledge disruption,
Although we have, well, we don't in Sherborn, but
Right.
Saint-Gobain has a lot of facilities in Massachusetts, actually.
Yeah,
So-
but not, I mean, they have the mother load. Like, there's a few places that have massive amounts, that they've had air emissions that traveled, tens of miles. So it's a pretty extensive issue up there.
so the subject, interestingly, that subject came up at the Public Safety Committee. I attend
Which
those
subject?
meetings.
Ledge?
The ledge disruption, risk on the water supply. And so they're actually interested in us updating them in the winter. Well, it was a subject we decided would be better for the winter because there's a little more time. And so I thought that was good, and it was interesting because there were a couple ideas presented for ways to potentially incorporate fees for testing as something the town could offer. Apparently, there's another town that whenever a person gets a building permit, included in the building permit fee is something that covers the expense of that testing. And so for
Like water testing?
for testing, pre and post testing, they said that there's the chair of the committee actually proposed, because of the potential concern to other residents in the town, and if there is a risk to the aquifer, obviously that's something that would have a greater impact and a greater interest. So they were suggesting an idea for future implementation and enforcement would be to embed in the cost of a building permit what would be necessary, and the town could offer it as an option that a homeowner could elect to do if they want to test their water at the time of purchase and sale. For baseline testing.
You mean in addition to
so
a
that's
separate, those are two
different than
different.
the building
Right,
permit.
well, they were,
Okay.
I'll
So
have to
it's
have him.
two different
It was a
ideas.
conversation that was proposed, that was between multiple people. And the idea of embedding some of those fees in with the building permit, so it's something that the town offers, that's not the burden of an individual homeowner. It may benefit the town. to
That's sort of
have
along the lines of
baseline
what we
testing,
had
right, so
discussed, yeah.
it's sort of like the Title V inspection benefits more than just the homeowner, when it's when there's such a high prevalence of private water supply.
Okay.
So I
I
thought that
don't
was,
completely understand if it's
well, I don't
doing
either.
the water, if it's a new construction, does
Then
it mean
get-
that the town takes on the responsibility of getting the water sample and submitting it, and they've included it
No,
in the building
but that
fee?
the-
Or you mean when they're specifically doing?
They could get
new
reimbursed,
construction?
maybe, is that what they were saying, that the?
It was in the context, I think that I shouldn't, maybe I'm jumping the gun by discussing it at the meeting, but I think I should have a conversation with that individual.
Mhm.
They were talking about it with a particular concern about multi-unit development in areas where ledge disruption might be part of the project, as the big project. And
I could
Why
almost
don't-
guess that's Boxborough, because they have extra regulations because they've had such bad trouble with
so
the.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to report back,
Mhm.
because I thought it was very interesting, and that I thought it might be relevant for our discussion about system of notification, about, how do we ensure before and after testing, so we have baseline values for comparison, and how do we just sort of get information that would be useful, but also not have it to be so burdensome for individuals.
Well, I think, that's similar to some of the things for the language that I had put in my more expansive, not the let's get something on the books as quickly as
Yeah.
possible, which I think makes a lot of sense. But, how that gets done, I mean, I definitely think that the financial burden shouldn't be ultimately on the homeowner that might be
Yeah.
affected. It should be on the proponent. But how that gets done and who's the administrator and all that, that's the in the weeds stuff that is going to take some
Right.
time to work out. So I think that we made the right choice by, well, let's get something on the books in terms of even just notification and notice and planning and some forethought. And then we can start auguring into, I think, how are we going to work this as a town and make sure that the burden and the negative impact isn't on the abutters,
Yeah.
and prevent maybe problems before they happen.
Right, and in the town where something like this takes place, it's with the building
The building department.
department. It's not the Board of Health, it's the building department.
Right, and I think for them, it was because of the blasting agents.
The purple,
That
right?
was the
Yeah.
driver for
Yeah.
them, and so
New Hampshire.
in terms of a blasting permit and that.
Right,
It
right.
it was, fell into that and was easy to connect that way.
Right.
So.
But it's worth
Okay,
pursuing.
that's,
just-
yeah, no, that's, and interesting, I'm glad that they're interested in that.
Yeah, I know, I'm glad too. I think it sounds like there's a lot of interest on the Public Safety Committee about the water, drinking water, which I think is good. And so
Okay.
I'll be reporting back to them.
All right, that's great.
And they're also interested in the FEMA and the
Oh, that's
status
not a-
of the emergency corps.
Okay, but that,
That's-
if we can add it
That's
to another
yeah,
agenda
right, So we
item?
can talk about that in the
Do
future.
you want to add it to the next agenda? Or
Sure.
you mean sometime in the future?
Sure,
Is
anytime.
FEMA
There's no
under our
emer-
purview or is
Some
it
discussion
Concom?
about FEMA Emergency
Management
Management.
Act, but isn't that, is that us or is that Concom?
No, we participate in that, although it hasn't been as active as in the past when we'd spend like a day or part of a day doing tabletop exercises and other things, and also at the MAHB conferences in the past, because that was funded partially by that agency. I don't even know what it is at the state. Did it come out of Region 4?
What?
AB for us and our MAHB conference attendance.
Yeah, they came out of
Okay,
regional funds. It can't anymore.
yeah. So we had to take half
Okay.
of these sessions in emergency management, so learned all sorts of things about body identification and all sorts of unusual topics that I never really would have gotten into. if not-
Yeah.
So,
I'm glad that there's actually a lot of interest in things that are pertinent to our group, and I think that's helpful to have communication and work, address these issues.
okay. Actually, let's do, it's 7:30, and we have a variance hearing for a septic replacement at 96 South Main. It does not appear that there are any abutters, but if any come, we will.
I have not gotten the green cards yet. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Did you get them all?
Except for the Army Corps of Engineers that came back, it's the wrong address for them.
Okay, you got the, okay. You got the original envelope. Okay. All right. Didn't see the letter. Okay, yeah.
This is 96 South Main Street. This is located between Lamplighter Lane and Golding Street West. It's the house before, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a field and a little, like a garage in the front, it almost looks like a farm stand.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the house is way in the back.
Yeah, this house is just
Yep.
before that, yeah,
Okay.
it's got some woods in front. It's an existing 5-bedroom, single-family home. It has 2 wells on site, one's a dug well. It's not in use, we're proposing to fill that in. This one is in use, this is a drilled well. It has wetlands in the back of the property, this actually goes up, and then it falls off again into a wetland, and there's a tennis court back there. This is the shape of the property. Let's see what else. Given those constraints, we did our testing and to try to stay as far away from this buffer, we're only at 100. We did our testing in this area. The soils were really, really bad. We had redox at 10 inches, this was back in March, 14 inches and 12 inches.
Wow.
And in each test pit, we had a weep at 12, weep at 20, and a weep at 15, so they were just filling with water. Kind of like over by your house. Yeah. So we sent it off to a lab, came back, as we suspected, it's a sill bone. Probably the worst material for a septic system. It's going to be slightly mounded, so 2 feet. We pushed it as, we're providing advanced treatment with the fast geoflow as best we can. We are 10 feet from the property line. 100 feet from the on-site well. And we did stay 125 feet from the back of the wetland system back here. that's about it. The cesspool actually is right here, the existing septic system. It's caved in, it's a big hole. It was back in March, and it still is today. It's,
Didn't uncave.
no, it's got some tape around it and stuff, but it's just a single person living here, so it's not, I didn't see any breaking out on
No
the surface
effluent
or anything.
discharge.
No. But as you guys know, with these type of systems, they do require variances from both the state and the local level, and that's why we're here.
I'm sure it's better than a hole in the ground.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you said it's a 5-bedroom?
It's a 5-bedroom home, yeah.
That someone's by themselves?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we have our usual situation with existing homes of a lot of constraints, and even though, maybe there's some land way back here getting there,
It's all
looks like it would be,
yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I
continue.
should've-
So
I
it
should've pointed
it
out.
goes down to wetlands, up to a tennis court, and back down to wetlands? Ah,
Yeah.
Where's the
okay.
tennis court?
There's a tennis court, you actually have to, it's like a filled area to get over to the tennis court through the wetlands. Probably wouldn't be allowed to go.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
it must have happened.
Yeah,
So they still use it?
it's pretty run down, yeah.
Oh.
She might.
Too bad.
Yeah.
I have a tennis court right near me, yeah, let's go.
Okay, so, actually, since we have a moment, David, I don't know if you want us to go through some of the things that we see often. And one, actually, if you'd like to explain, oh, go ahead.
Number 5, I believe that should be 10.1 AC, if the well is uphill. I think it would be A. And then when it reads 100.3 feet from the on-site uphill well versus should be 150 feet, because the C requires that you increase it 25 feet. So it would have been 125 feet if it was only 10.1A, but once you add C, it would be 150 feet required, but you're requesting to go to 100.3 feet.
Right.
So just that correction in what he's asking for. Yeah, so it's.
Is that because of the perk
Is it
rate?
the-
So it's 10, yeah,
It should be
when it's,
125. Yeah, because it is on
but,
No, but what's the perk?
what's the perk rate?
Oh, it was yes, the worst rate, sorry.
Then
Was
why
a-
are
Right,
you
that's
a-
what it
Then
said.
why are you asking for section C?
I probably typed that wrong.
Okay,
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
then it should just be
Okay.
10.1A.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a .15
Okay.
gallons per day.
So just 10.1A.
10.1.
Okay.
So it should be
rather
125, so the
Yes.
distance was correct.
Yes.
Okay.
than- Yeah, as long as he
Wrong
doesn't
reference.
include C, section C.
Okay.
Okay, so, David, I can't remember if you've been here for other ones where we've had the sieve analysis instead
I don't
of
think
perk
so.
tests.
That's
Would you
very
like to
good.
explain that?
Yeah, if you can't do a perk in this festival, we send it out to UMass, and they come back and they give us a loading rate based on the soil type. And this one came back as a silt loam, which is, we have a table in Title V, and it assigns it a .15. So you take your gallons per day of the whole, it's 110 per bedroom, so it's 550 divided by .15, and that's your square footage of the system. So that's why it's 3
So
times
big.
the size of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
And-
probably the biggest one that I've done.
I'm assuming that you couldn't do the perk test because it was too wet.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that's what he
Yeah.
said, yes,
Yeah,
the
water
water
was just-
came in.
Yeah.
Is there, that's the only reason I can think of that I've ever heard for not being able to do the perk test.
There is
Have you-
another one.
What's the other?
This has happened several times. There's like 5 feet of fill before you hit
Sure,
naturally
yeah.
occurring.
Oh,
You're not allowed to be down in a hole deeper than 5 feet.
oh, okay.
So if the perk test is at 7, you gotta take a sample. Or you gotta excavate a trench box with nobody down.
Or
right?
get confined space rescue
That's
team
happened on
and,
occasion.
yeah, that's trained folks and all the rest. It's kind of difficult.
And did you say you were going to have to mount it to get the separation, or?
If we had gone with a traditional type system, it would have been about 5 or 6 feet tall. Yeah.
But you said it's going to be,
It's still 2 feet, because
2
you gotta
feet.
maintain 2 feet of separation, so so like this corner right here, 94, it's up to 96.
Mhm.
So we're maintaining, because we had groundwater 10 inches.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's still slightly mounted, but if they grade it off properly, it won't look like a, you know.
The septic
It'll be so
system.
large,
Yeah.
that it'll look more like a plateau.
Right.
And do you know,
Versus a turtle shell.
do you know where the abutters well is? Because I know you're 10 feet from the property line instead of the 20 feet. Do you know
Yeah.
where their well is?
It's more than, yeah, it's 200, the house is, it's way back. There's a road almost that comes in.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and then this neighbor he's pretty far too. We're in excess of the,
Okay.
So,
And definitely have them decommission the dug well.
yeah. It's kind of neat though, I mean,
No,
we opened it and you could see the ground that Mark and I did at the time, and it was pretty much at the
Yeah.
same level, yeah.
10 inches?
Yeah,
Like,
Working
You
just
didn't
like
have
this,
to-
that's cool.
You didn't even need imaging help.
I know. Yeah, we'll fill it in.
okay, shall we just go through them, and if anyone thinks of any other questions along the way? So do we have a motion to grant a variance to section 1.2?
So moved?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
We have a motion to grant a variance to section 5.1D.
So moved.
Second.
And anything else? All those in favor?
Aye.
We have a motion to grant a variance to 8.01.
So moved.
Second?
I'll just note that the 2 feet is something that is allowed under the IA program at the state level. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. Do we have a motion to grant a variance to 8.02?
So moved.
Second.
This one's related really to the previous one as
Yeah.
well, somewhat.
I never
So,
understood why they were separate.
Yeah, you have to read the wording really carefully about the fine distinction, and I can't remember which one goes which way.
Yeah.
All right, do we, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain, okay. Do we have a motion to grant us variance to section 10.1A?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
And do we have a motion to grant a variance to section 10.2, and this is the property line offset mentioned to one corner of the system from 20 down to 10 feet.
So
moved.
Oops.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then there are 2 local upgrade approvals. And this one we've seen, I believe, since you've been on, David, the need to seal certain joints, so because of the
Hydraulic
high
cement.
groundwater? Okay. And the other one is the sieve analysis again. So do we have a motion to grant a variance to section 15.4051? Is that J or I?
Jay.
That's what I thought, okay. And the next one is I. Okay. J?
The other backwards, it should be.
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And do we have a motion to grant a variance to section 15.4051I?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so I'll close the hearing, and,
Mark,
nope, sorry.
no, Mark did.
Oh, you said that the
rec-
plans are ready for
Yeah,
approval?
he did recommend approval,
Excellent.
yes.
Subject to deed recording on the
Yeah.
IA technology, garbage grinder, I'm assuming as well? Okay. And pre-construction conference, that's a requirement. Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the plans with those 2 conditions?
So moved.
Second?
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All
Thank
right.
you very much.
So I do, wait, you'll have to sign the
Oh, yeah.
regulatory approval. Thank you.
Let's see if we can do something quick until we get
Flu
on
clinic
time.
update?
Oh, yeah, essentially just saying that we have plenty of flu vaccine, and if anyone wants to register, please call the office.
Are there any restrictions on who can get it?
Well, age 3 and above,
Oh, okay.
that's it. But,
So are they going to put a sign out? You know, they have all those other signs about galas and
oh,
plays.
down at the, there's a
Yeah.
limit to how many can go up. So they're going to put the electronic sign in front of the police, fire station. It should actually be up soon if it isn't up already.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I just talked to Sean today, and I think the fire station is having an open house, so they may wait until the open house, but it will be.
Do you want to mention the day and time?
It is Tuesday, October 30th, from 6 to 8 at St. Teresa's.
You know what would be maybe a good idea is to talk to DSHS and DSMS and have them, you know, they have their little bulletin boards where they talk about, you know, things happening in the town and school activities, but just, that's a PSA. I mean, I would think that would be a good thing to just, because parents actually read that.
Is that something
So-
you've ever used before?
I've
Sending something to the schools?
done that through Pine Hill, but I've never gone to the,
Yeah, because half the kids in the middle school and the
Yeah,
high school are from Sherborn, so,
yeah.
I don't know.
So maybe start with Pine Hill and see if they can...
Oh, I've already, they've
Oh,
done,
okay.
yeah, I
Oh, all
always
right.
send it to Pine Hill because they send it right out.
Okay. I don't know who you would contact at the school, nurse?
Yeah, I'll try, yeah.
Yeah, Kiri Santos is the nurse at the high school. I don't know
Yeah, I'll
the
find
middle
out,
school.
I'll look on the website.
Yeah,
I'll
I
find
don't know
it.
the middle school nurse.
Yeah.
but-
Okay, yeah,
Can't hurt.
yeah,
I just
I
feel
know.
like
Yeah.
we need to be as public
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
it as possible.
it should be on cable TV. I don't know how many people watch.
Usually 4. When you look at the YouTube counts.
Do we need to wait for, oh, no, the food inspector's not here. So we can do the one-day food establishment permit? We're really ratifying what the food inspector did.
Post
for the-
facto, right?
So an event at the Sweet Meadow Farm on 10/14. So it got the food inspector's review and
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
and-
I think she just forgot to give it to me for the previous meeting, so
Okay.
I just said, you gotta issue it if it's,
Yeah.
So what do we need to do?
And they submitted
just
the...
ratify
Okay.
that that the approval, they're aware of it.
Did they pay for whatever permit?
Yep,
and-
yep. Yeah,
Okay,
they paid.
paperwork's
They've-
done?
Yeah, they've done it the past several years.
All right. So, do we have a motion to ratify the food inspector's approval of the temporary one-day food establishment permit for Sweet Meadow, for the Natick Catholic communities, actually, at Sweet Meadow?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Okay. Oh, this is great. Let's see. Maybe, think we can start a couple minutes, or, I assume you're here for the 41 North Main?
Yes.
Discussion? Okay. We'll start, and we can always backtrack if anyone comes in and wants to hear what they missed, since it's a little less formal. Good. So we're just about to start talking about 41 North Main.
Please be sure to sign in, so that I get everybody's names.
So I'm assuming that you're interested residents about what may or may not happen at 41 North Main, and do you have specific concerns that you'd like us to talk about? I'll talk about what I know from having gone to various meetings, because it's still in a very loose discussion formulation stage, but
I think some of us would like to know the process, where, how you're involved in this or not, when this is a municipal well level application. Do you have a role in it, where you approve, comment, or whatnot? We have no exposure to this volume of associated with this well. Individual wells, that we all have some experience with, neighbors, distances, septic and the rest. So if you could elaborate on that.
okay, and then,
Questions.
did you have a different,
No, it was actually basically the same thing.
Okay.
You know, what the Board of Health's role is in this whole process.
Once we know that, then there's a level, we can make some comments that are appropriate to your purview. I copied you on what I'd sent already, 2 weeks ago to the Conservation Commission. We will get out another set of comments from what we've learned since that last meeting, talking to others, and maybe tonight. We could copy again tomorrow before the Concom hearing. We have, as you, I think you all got copies. There's a number on Hunting Lane that have got this municipal size well that have a lot of stake in what that well would draw against their marginal wells. Sometimes run dry, sometimes affected by the drought, so activity, and it's not a deep aquifer. I think you all know that the well at the spa was dropped to reportedly 1,000 feet to get the adequate volume they needed for that. In fact, I'd love to know what that, maybe Helen can tell us sometime, what kind of volume the spa required. Is that just a normal household, or did it need an extra large volume? Anyway, you have to go 1,000 feet. And when you've got butters that have marginal wells, they will have concerns. We can comment on the test plan that was provided to the Concom, that was flawed.
So I think
short-term,
we've got a
minimum.
big scope, which may or may not be relevant if we don't have jurisdiction. And so what I would say is I think maybe we can start with that and then
Right.
tailor the response to that
That is
context.
the key, but she asked what are our concerns.
Yep.
and that's why I.
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely.
okay, so your concerns are not unsimilar to concerns that we've had on other similar
Yeah, you
projects.
can have
So-
that with any other application, even small. This is 20,000 gallons they're looking for.
Right.
Per day.
Okay, so I could, right, fill you in on that, but just before I do that, yes.
My question is the 12 new units that are not even on the ground yet, just down the way, not very far.
59 North Main?
Yeah,
Which- yeah.
thank you. I don't know if, I do remember some question about whether the testing was adequate, and either you or the ZBA, I can't remember which board it was pushing for more testing, and the developer was resisting doing that. So I don't know how that ever turned out. I don't know how much that is expected to come. Is it a public water supply?
Oh, no, that one has a much lower volume, and that,
Right.
because they've configured it so that they qualify as two private wells rather than a public water supply,
Okay.
that is within our jurisdiction. But because it was a 40B, that kind of complicates
Yeah.
it. Do they have to follow our
And I think
requirements or
what-
not?
Right.
And they did, though eventually comply. We worked with the ZBA and the applicant on that, and they did monitor neighbors' wells who were amenable to having their wells monitored, but was offered to several, and some subset of the several chose to have their wells monitored. And so that one was evaluated for over a 2-day pump test.
And my recollection was so that ZBA discussion, my recollection from the public meeting is it included fairly extensive documentation in terms of the different strategies for testing and the back and forth. So I would assume those are public records, and would sort of encourage you guys to access those records to see what that discussion was. The kind of key points were what the type of monitoring was in terms of whether it was within the abutters wells and what the occupancy status of the residences would be. So I'd say, I think my recollection is the testing protocol they pursued was different than what was described in the materials submitted to the board.
But
Yeah.
they did have a hydrogeologist that presented
Yeah.
their position, and then didn't the ZBA have a hydrogeologist that we also spoke with
Yep.
to review it? So I don't know what the potential availability of that scenario could be for
I think
this
there's a lot of
proposition.
materials, and it's
Yeah.
certainly something worth taking a look at to be able to say, if this was done for this project, how does that color what we look at for other projects that may have a better impacts that one would want to consider? And so I just remember that those were pretty extensively documented with specific technologies, discussion of the trade-offs and other pieces that I found enlightening as like a non-hydrogeologist. And so I would encourage you guys to, I don't remember the dates of the ZBA meeting that talked about it, but I remember feeling like this is pretty comprehensive and worth knowing about when thinking about these
I
issues.
want to say last March, April, something like that, for those meetings.
My
Yes.
name's John DeSalvo. I live at 44 North Main Street, across the way, across the street. I have 15 minutes of water, so, I'm really concerned about this. And I think for me, it's a matter of this large well, to me, is a Trojan horse for getting approved with all of the testing and the DEP ahead of, I know that they're planning on putting housing units up Hunting Hill. Additional wells there, maybe whether or not the businesses will need additional wells. Just concerned that all the testing and concern will happen ahead of the 59 North Main Street, coming to fruition, as well as the additional wells that will be easier to approve after. And I know with the change of, the zoning, all these things, I just feel like a total comprehensive plan should happen ahead of anything being approved, so that they know what the full extent is before the zoning change that they give to get. And then the other thing is, I just really don't understand how a public-sized well could go be approved for testing. And I know it's out of your jurisdiction, but and because it's public, that it's out of your jurisdiction. But I just don't understand, how could that get approved for testing on what's currently zoned for, a single family? Like, I assume the only thing that could be approved there would be for a single family, until everything else got approved in the zoning change.
So why don't we?
Maybe we could just kind of start with the jurisdictional
Review.
question.
So I could tell you we'll start with just the easier part of this, and that is not necessarily easy, but what Mass DEP does when they're getting an application for a public water supply. So they're not at that stage yet where they have formally done that, I don't think, but we don't hear about that necessarily. I think they're more in the just seeing if there's even water available, but then that means, right, you want to know how it's available to who. So DEP, and it gets a little trickier when it's a bedrock well. So ordinarily, if you have an overburden aquifer, it's a lot easier for folks to map that, to evaluate the transmissivity of the material, how much water might be there, how easily does it flow, what's tapped into it already, taking it. And unfortunately, at 20,000 gallons a day, this project doesn't fall under the higher level of scrutiny that Mass DEP would do for a much larger well. It used to be a cutoff of 100,000 gallons a day, but I think because of reduced and don't, this, since being broadcast, take some of this with a grain of salt, because I'm not positive, but what the current status is, but I've heard that there aren't the same funds, or else the regulations have changed over that 100,000 level, and whether that it's still in effect, that for that, they would look at, if you're going to install a public water supply of that size, how would that affect the basin? So they would look at basin-wide, and then every X number of years, they would review the status of the basins and evaluate how much more water could be withdrawn and have a steady state supply and not draw down. But for something like this, I don't think they typically look at that. Also, it's harder with a bedrock well to evaluate the impacts. So I'm aware of a project that was built a few years ago that had a bedrock well, bigger than this project, but not enormously bigger. And the DEP has requirements that while they're doing testing for that well to verify that it can supply what they need it to supply for the project, that they monitor surrounding wells. So that is part of their process, but I would like, if it gets to that, I think that we should comment to Mass DEP about some of our concerns, and also know upfront where they're going to be testing, because I know about that other project because I had a client across the street from them with a public water supply, and their wells did not get tested, even though it was so close. So they had tested some residential, and
I feel like
there
we're
was
sort of
no
almost like one further
outreach,
step
so-
back, though, because this is sort of saying, what would Mass DEP do? And I
But
think
that-
Lauren's question was sort of, what pieces are within the purview of the Sherborn Board of Health to approve, not approve, or assign conditions to, as opposed to like what?
The information is valuable as well.
Okay.
Well, the part I was saying that we don't have any standing necessarily, except to go
Provide that guidance or
and
be-
say, by the way, DEP, do you understand, here's the layout of wells, we have more information for you, how's that being addressed? But I don't think there would be any obligation on their part
So there's not a permit that we
necessarily.
issue. So I think for your question of how do we achieve agency in determining this project that impacts our homes, the value of our homes, the usability of our homes. And so I think the answer to that question from a Board of Health is we don't have a checkpoint that this project will require us to pass that we can assign those conditions to. I think that providing insight into the context of what DEP would do is a piece of it, but I also think my goal is to make sure you guys understand who are the stakeholders that can help us have our voice in this project that may impact us deeply. And so I think the piece here is if we don't have a piece to approve, we can have opinions that we can share. I think right now, a lot of this seems like it's with the selectmen, at least in the meetings I've been at, because so much of it is contingent on the septic system and those kind of pieces that are before the selectmen that have to get.
Except we have a responsibility to the neighboring wells.
But I think we don't. Like, I think
But we
Mass
don't have the
DEP
authority, I mean,
Right.
so.
No, we
so-
do. We have authority over the neighboring wells that are private water supplies. We have that jurisdiction, and that's our responsibility.
But-
And although our challenge is that there's no statutory protection.
I don't
We
think.
have we have
I don't think we can assert that we have authority over those,
I don't
because
either.
if I'm the developer and I say, I need to come to you for no permit, I don't know that we can say, yes, you do. We're introducing that based on this other kind of general public good and
But-
wellness
But
piece.
but we could introduce, so we have data from 59 North Main. So, right, because they did do testing for 59 North Main. So there could be extrapolations done from that sort of information, like what kind of drawdown was seen at that kind of pump rate in the same vicinity, so that, some of these hydrogeological
Right.
concerns could be taken maybe at least into consideration by the state. I mean, I don't know if the
Right.
state even has that information, so I think making sure that the state has information
Yeah,
and
they
things
don't.
like making sure that blasting isn't done in any kind of
Right.
uncontrolled manner. I mean, there's several things that I think are kind of hot buttons for all of us as far as what we can control. I don't think it sounds like we do have the regulatory purview to control it, but I think we can certainly make sure that information is conveyed to the state and right?
And the only
I
example.
guess the question is the state the best avenue versus selectmen or planning board or other people?
Well, let me back up a little bit,
Yeah.
because even though we don't necessarily have regulatory authority over this, and yes, we could try and insert ourselves into the Mass DEP by providing additional information, but there's been somewhat informal and formal meetings between selectmen, planning board, Board of Health, I went representing Board of Health,
ZBA.
I don't believe ZBA was there, Concom, did I say planning board, and someone from advisory. I think those were the groups so far, at least at the meetings I was able to attend, where we were talking about this project because it is a little different in that it's going to require maybe some zoning issues and special approvals, so it's not like a single-family home on a single parcel in town where you come in and the rules are all laid out, because this doesn't fit into those check boxes at the moment. So there is a lot of discussion about if the town would support this concept, then what are the things that we also need to know? And water has been a big topic, and septic, both are big topics in that. So
Are those meetings ongoing? Because it certainly seems
Yes.
like that would be a meeting you guys would want to attend.
Well, it seems to me, Darrell, it's a chicken egg situation. Say, if the town, maybe the town needs to discuss it and decide whether this is appropriate for that downtown, for the neighborhood, before a well is drilled that is municipal size in scope. That's what you're told, in its size to be drilled.
Okay, so let me fill in
This
case,
is out of order, and what you've had is a group, small group, you, Darrell, along with a representative each, trying to facilitate a project that hasn't hit the town or its impact on the neighborhood. Did you folks, when you were meeting, say, let's go talk to the neighborhood?
I don't know that
I don't think we're-
so I think I wouldn't characterize it as facilitating,
Yeah.
because I think,
If
Right,
this was
I would
in
say-
your neighborhood, Darrell, I would be going and making sure you were aware of it before it got.
Well, isn't there a meeting next?
okay, hold on, can I speak? Hold on, I'd like to address it. One, we were not talking about, well, I think, yes, I think there might have been some people at the meeting who want to facilitate the project, and others, I mean, I would say from my perspective, it was, what are the things we need to think about and make sure we understand for a project of that scale? So I was weighing in more on a technical Board of Health perspective kind of thing. So I think, just so you know, right now there's plans to install wells on the property, and it had to go through Conservation Commission because of where those wells would be located.
The RDA.
They own the property. It is, just let me finish. People put in wells on their property to test things out. That's one of those things that it's something they can do. There are no guarantees that they can do anything with that unless it passes all sorts of hurdles. At some point, when it does, the plan is to roll this out to the town. So I believe it was at a selectmen's meeting, I can't remember if that was one that you were at, but there was discussion, I think you were there, there was discussion about that it's too soon probably for this upcoming fall town meeting to have the discussion about this project because there wasn't enough information. So the proponents for it wanted to come to town meeting, but there's really so little information that they've presented thus far. So their plan was, how can we do public outreach, have more discussion groups? So that's all being discussed. But on the matter of the well that they're talking about putting in now, it's their property, they can put in a well.
Well, aren't they just doing, I thought they were just doing
Test
exploratory
wells.
testing.
It's not something that's approved for drinking and what have you.
The test well is being drilled, what they're proposing would become the permanent well. It is not a test well. They
Well-
would be drilling a 6-inch well.
It would, Their
Only after
hope is that
permitting.
eventually it would be a permanent well, but
Your
they
point
are.
is, there's one hole, it will change names if things go the way they'd like it to, but it, right, but broadly speaking, like, they're not doing something little to do something big, they're doing the big thing, it's called one thing, it will be called a different thing if it passes those hurdles, but it's the same hole in the ground.
So what they are, I believe they're,
What's next?
so there were discussions with the Conservation Commission, which had authority over that because of the location of that. They had to cross wetlands to get
There's a
in, they
buffer
had to
zone,
find
right?
appropriate spots. And there were discussions about them putting in, from the Conservation Commission's perspective, monitoring wells to assess what, during their pump tests that they were initially talking about having, which would have been extended period of time, is to put in monitoring wells in the overburden so you could see if pumping from the bedrock affected surface. So that would affect wetlands and surface waters, which are under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. So there were a lot of discussions about that, meetings with various, experts about those kind of monitoring. It's a requirement, as I mentioned earlier, the Water Management Act, that over 100,000 gallons, so larger public water supplies, that's a common requirement that they put in. They're called drive point wells, so they're shallow, they're not going into bedrock. They're going in and they're just looking at changes in, a pond level, a stream level, groundwater levels over time. So when those go in, and the old requirements, I don't know if they're still in existence, I'm just not up to date on the recent changes in that program, but they would map it out for years and correlate changes with precipitation and other events and analyze it. So that's the sort of thing that might be done, but you do want to know ahead of time if there's going to be a problem. You don't want to just find out 10 years from now that, oops, we're out of water. So,
But I guess the question I'd have as an abutter is, why do I have less standing than a pond?
Yeah.
because of
Agreed.
where it is, but there have been discussions with them about also monitoring, just like 59 North Main Street, is when they get to the bigger pump test, because what they're proposing right now is a very short test, and it may, it could have impact, but it might not, because it's a less hours of pumping, is to then go to the neighbors and test the neighbors. And it would be something that people would have to grant access to their well. Somebody would have to come along, and what we worked out for 59 North Main is, rather than have somebody come every hour and do some measurements, is there are transducers. So there are electronic devices that you can put into the well, and it'll monitor, it'll collect it every minute, every 5 minutes, every hour, whatever, and look at and try to see what kind of impacts there might be. So we haven't had a chance to discuss this as a board, because a lot has been happening since our last meeting,
I also
but
think, so what I would say broadly, not like speaking on my own behalf and not that of the board, is I think the general question of, do we think we may or may not have jurisdictional oversight? My belief is that we don't, that this falls to DEP, but at the same time, I think we do have agency to communicate to town boards that do have jurisdictional oversight to say, these are the things we'd recommend. I think that none of us would say we don't think that's an important thing to consider. It's just a question of, do we have a checkpoint that can consider that? I think we were present and participatory at the 59 North Main project to say, we actually really think there's a right way to do this, and we're not sure that what you've proposed is doing it. I think part of what was arrived at was ZBA hearing that feedback and thoughtfully incorporating it with the balances of the 40B. And I think that ultimately what was done to look at that project was not what I would have wished for if I had a magic wand, but it was closer to that than what we started with, that I think was an effort to give abutters that insight into how is this going to affect me and what does this mean. I think that similar things are certainly, from my standpoint, appropriate for looking at this project, to be able to provide reassurances to say, we know what the effect will be. I think part of what gets tricky is that, like, if you've got 15 minutes of water today, or if people are in dry conditions, that's not a North Main project problem. It's that your well is at baseline insufficient. And so it's balancing those tensions with saying we have lots of people in Sherborn who need to drill new wells for things independent of development or other projects. And so I think that's one of the pieces that will be attention, is if the baseline my well is insufficient, if it remains insufficient post-testing, it's hard to assert I've been wrong. And so I think just thinking through some of that in terms of what are the things we're hoping for and how do we manage that is there. I don't think anybody on the board would say, we don't think that the impact on abutting wells should be important. Like, we had this conversation for a single well that was being, the second well drilled on a property that we talked about for an hour. So it's not that we don't take this seriously or care. It's just, that was one where we are the approvers for this well. This is different, and so it's figuring out how we can be effective in putting those concerns forward, to bring that perspective to the table and figure out which table.
So, I don't know if you guys saw this, but there's a meeting on Thursday at 7 o'clock about this development, and I think that would be a really important.
This is the planning
and
board one?
This is at Sherborn Town Hall on Thursday. I will unfortunately be speaking at the LSPA dinner meeting, so I cannot attend, but 7 o'clock. And I've been to similar type meetings over the years in Sherborn where this is a great time for residents to have their voice heard directly by the developer, with people like the selectmen there, and talking about, here are our concerns. We already have, aquifer production concerns. We're going to have additional drain on the aquifer from the 59 North Main Street. This is the kind of testing that was done there. What are you proposing? And really, push on the developer to find out what are their plans, because everything's been very nebulous.
I also think there's a lot, I think that some of the concerns that were raised by folks at the town meeting about the Coolidge Street project was, there's a big impact that we're asking a small part of town to absorb in terms of, if I'm in a butter and I've got a large, higher density development or higher kind of impact development, and this is in my area, as a town, sort of what does that look like? So we're not just broken into little neighborhoods or sections that say I'm within a quarter mile, so this touches me, but sort of how do we think largely about, right now, it's kind of where you live and the thing, and your home and your family, and it could be mine. And so we should say that for all of us, we're thinking about this broadly in a community-minded standpoint, to say, how do we make sure that what we're doing, it kind of works for Sherborn, and that we don't have these unintended consequences that we say, we put this in, now your wells are dry, now you need to tie into the water supply. Okay, well, now we need to make the water supply bigger. Okay, now their wells are dry. That we kind of end up with this series of dominoes. And I think that's another consideration, just about all these projects going in.
But I think that, this is talking about the town center too. And I think it is really important that we're not just talking about infrastructure and potential tapping in for wastewater treatment or even water supply for the town center, but it's the private residential abutters that are also not even directly on North Main Street, the people like you guys on Hunting and some of the adjacent properties. And I think it is really important that the selectmen hear this directly, because I think we certainly want to advocate for protecting people's wells and making sure there's adequate and in both in terms of quantity and quality water supply for the residents of the town. But I also think in terms of, let's roll up our sleeves and work together, this needs to be heard directly by both the developer and the selectmen.
And on the fields at Sherborn was complicated, but had similar issues in terms of what was the 10 proposed wells at one point going to be doing to, potentially doing to neighbors' supplies. And so there were, early on, before they changed to a public water supply and it went to Mass DEP, we had some arrangements for provisions for the neighbors as well.
Can I make one clarification before you? So my understanding at this is the challenge is that private water supplies are not protected by statute. So what that means is Flint, Michigan, for example, those public water supplies are protected under the Clean Drinking Water Act. And there's also the Freshwater Act, which protects the tributaries and the water supply from the ground, like the rivers and the streams. Private water supplies have no statutory protection at all. So Sherborn has a challenge because 100% of our wells are public, and we only have semi and transient categories of public water supplies, which are the schools and municipal buildings, et cetera, that supply a number of people over a certain number of hours in a day or in a period of time. So we only have jurisdiction over your health interests, we don't have leverage where, when the public water supplies of Flint, Michigan were affected, there was statutory protection which forced the responsible party to actually address the problem. So we are in a position, a challenging position, because we have no legal authority over the project. We have our authorities over your health interests, and so we can give input to the ZBA, who is involved with the permitting process, and we can give our opinions to the ZBA, but they're going to ultimately make that decision.
And I
No,
think
in
the
this
ZB
case,
I
it's
mean, I
not
think it is-
ZBA yet.
Yeah, I
but-
think it's like select, because I think there's
Okay.
also,
And
like, I think
planning
your
board.
point
Whoever the
is,
person-
there's
the
lots of
correct
facets to
party
the
is,
project.
that's-
Right now, one of the asks is to
Yeah.
say town land for wastewater treatment. And so,
Quid
as
pro
an
quo.
example, I think, thinking about what that looks like and thinking about this as a package or suite of things, should the project move forward, that I think, if the town of Sherborn is giving up things, then the residents of Sherborn should be getting things, and that net value should serve the interest of citizens of the town as well as the developer. It shouldn't be unidirectional or asymmetric. And so I think that's a piece that at least.
Right,
that
I would
Toasty Must
agree
is-
that since they're asking for a lot,
Right.
I think there's more opportunity for
Then
the
there might be
board
other
and
40B.
other
Yeah.
organizations and people in town to contribute to what
And
that
DEP would
process
consider
is.
this to be a private matter between property owners, which is extremely unsatisfying. So unless you guys sued the developer, nobody.
Well, they do have some provisions for trying to evaluate neighboring properties.
Yeah.
So what we would need to do, if it gets to that point, is to ensure that we're happy with the level of
Assessment.
testing that's done beforehand for those assurances. And so I'll get to you in just a second, but I keep forgetting to mention this. So just learned that Dover has allocated some funds where they're going to be doing and putting in monitoring wells around town, because they want to understand how the changing dynamics of water withdrawals through wells and development in town are affecting groundwater levels. So they're hoping to start that relatively soon. I believe they've made their choice among some consultants, applicants for the project, although they haven't officially awarded it yet, so I don't know who that is and if that will work out as they like. But in any case, they're hoping to get those installed within the next year, and then start collecting data. And they would have the automated data collection system ongoing. The understanding of that data probably won't be there for years, but it might be something that we could borrow, because there's a lot of similarities in terms of just the layouts of the town, the general geology and that sort of thing, to understand that connection between increasing withdrawals from the bedrock and how that might be affecting. Because just to back up a little, bedrock wells work, so we don't have any major aquifers in Sherborn where you would just have a more shallow well that's just going into something that's almost like when you dig in the sand at the beach and, you see the water because it's matching up with the level of the pond or the ocean. So most of our wells in town, except for the more historic ones, are into bedrock. And then once you get into the bedrock, so you pass over, the dirt layer, and then you're into the bedrock layer, and then they're just cracks in the rock, and they have water in them. And it's so hard to know where are the cracks, which crack connects to another, and, so even if you put in a well here and a well here, they may not have any impact on one another if they're not connected. I mean, that's like a really simplistic explanation, but it's incredibly difficult to know how it's all going to play out. And so the best way they've come up with so far is, if you're going to do a major pump test on a new well, that you test those around and see if you can see anything changing. So for 59 North Main, they did see some impact to neighboring wells. It turned out not to be a lot, but, they could see that during the pump test, there was an effect
It could
of a
be
few feet, I
quantified,
believe, was at the most or something. You were present, so,
They did use transducers.
Right.
yeah.
Which is, it's not hard.
And I just want to pause because I think we asked you to sort of hold on your question, but I
Yes,
want to make sure
but-
we give you time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I have MBTE in my water, which was a result of past bad decisions, past boards, everyone moves on, but then these things stay. And,
That was
my
from the
family's sitting
wayside.
on an acre, and across the street, you might have 200 people sitting on an acre. It's 20,000 gallons up out of the ground, and then next door to me, you got 20,000 gallons of sewage going back in the ground. I understand that a lot of this is out of your control, and it confuses me still on how it's still allowed on what zone differently to be tested, but.
But I think for us, I'd say zone questions
Yeah,
totally
I-
don't take our word for us as yes or no.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just getting to the point of what comes back to it is, you guys did some really careful testing at 59 North Main. And,
We didn't, the developer did.
Right.
But there was data, you guys have the data reviewed, I appreciate that. I'm just suggesting that if this 200,000 gallon well is a Trojan horse well, to
20.
see what you can get out of this one well, and then if another 12 units or 30 units or another PUD goes up the hill, and then let's say maybe the plan is if there's not enough water, we'll put more wells over by the businesses, that would be in your jurisdiction. And I really feel that with the DEP doing its testing, it's doing its testing ahead of all these additional wells. And so you got 59 coming to fruition, and then you have potentially new wells that would be under your jurisdiction. And, I just feel like it's a lot of radical water up and down changes to the area, more than just the one well we're talking about that's sort of out of your jurisdiction right now. And I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say there is a frustration for the board, because, and as Matt mentioned, we had an hour-and-a-half discussion with someone over an irrigation well, and the importance of that and how it's really all drawing from the same shared common resource. There aren't good regulations for this kind of thing, and you know that out west, there have been water rights fights for a long time because there's much less water there, but here, there's the perception that we're water-rich, but that's changing as there's increasing development, and the person in Dover was mentioning that there are perennial streams there that are no longer perennial, and I think that's because of the draw of water from the ground and not being replenished. So, the only good thing, well, except for the septic and whatever that means, and the loadings on the ground, which is a whole other issue. We're a little closer to a closed cycle for our water here because we do pull out and put back into the ground pretty close together, as opposed to if we had MWRA water or something else, or fed into the MWRA sewer system, then we'd be losing all the water we pumped out of the ground, which is what's happened in
I think
North Shore. But in
you're-
any case, we do get the point, but it's something that,
We don't want to tell you we can fix this if we don't think we can fix it. What I would say is, I think we take seriously the concerns that you raise. We may share many of them, and I think the point that you're raising to say we really need to think of these projects in totality, I think nobody on the board would disagree. I think it's the question of, certainly if we kind of have an opportunity to provide this feedback to other town boards or this larger conversation we have as a community, I would echo the concerns that you raised, that we can't think of these projects as a series of projects in isolation because we share a single resource. It's the same water, and so I think sequencing, testing, being mindful of that is something I would certainly have no objections to, and I would expect to inform any conversations we're asked to have with other town boards and kind of any insights we offer.
and I agree with Lisa on, residents going and speaking, because
Has
they
more
hear me
power.
speak a lot, so this is not my board opinion, this is just my personal opinion, I go and I speak, and I don't know if I'm perceived as anti-development or pro-development, I don't know, but more often I'm perceived as anti-development, only because I bring up the questions of, are we sure this is okay? And I did bring that up at a selectmen's meeting, again, it's personal opinion, of that we had to be careful, because in the effort to maybe do something that'll bring in more business to downtown and do some of the development that some folks want to see in the downtown area, but would that be at the expense of people who are already living there? And so they want, I felt existing residents should be included in the evaluation and what the impacts might be.
So could we recommend or propone having an updated town aquifer study performed? I know, actually, my company did one. Carrie Parsons did it probably 20 years ago at this point in time, but there
In
have...
Sherborn?
Yeah. But there have
Early
been...
2000s.
There's been a
was
lot
their
of
company?
development, there's a lot of proposed development, it's changed.
Yeah.
But we don't have the benefit of having aquifers that are more easily studied in that manner. So when I think of that report, and I was involved in that.
I remember that,
So,
yeah.
I think that even that foundation is a long way away from understanding what a sustainable yield would be for our water resources, and then what the recharge dynamics are. Because we are recharging, but we're recharging something that's more contaminated than what we pulled out.
And
So
the more development, the more pavement, the less infiltration. I mean, it's not just one thing in isolation, so it's multiple factors, so.
So it's, just such a challenging topic, because I think the new methods of developing things are moving faster than the ability of science and regulations to keep up with it, and the ability to say, we tend to have a do it and assume there's no harm kind of approach to a lot of this stuff.
I think your point is
I'm
like,
not saying we as a board.
You're like, I want to be able to both take a shower and flush my toilet. These are the goals that I have. And I think it's easy for us, we're getting into really broad philosophical
Yes,
things, and you're
yes,
like,
yes.
I want to shower and flush the toilet on the same day.
Yeah.
And that's a different set of goals that's independent of larger questions. And I think the data we may get from Dover years from now is unlikely to provide benefit.
Yeah.
So I think that the kind of take-homes for you guys is your voices are really important, because you make this immediate and not abstract, and you make this about my home, not about the future of the development vision of Sherborn, which I think is something that only you as abutters can really bring to that conversation. I think we as the board would say, we're really invested in people having adequate and appropriate safe wells. In this case, we don't have a checkpoint, but we'd certainly say the same scrutiny and oversight and enthusiasm for making sure people have safe drinking water that we bring to an individual residence. We'd want you to be able to preserve in the face of development, because you and your family shouldn't be exposed to inadequate water or contaminated water or any other issues. So I would expect us to bring that same voice to the conversation that we apply where we do have jurisdiction and we do have direct oversight and the ability to approve or not approve.
And, for example,
Susie's
and I'll
been
get you
really
in just one
patient.
second.
Yeah. And I would also just like to bound it to
I've
say.
spent a lot of time
Yeah.
on these topics, and this week on this, in terms of saying what kind of monitoring, what's the technologies, what have I seen? So I've been sharing that with Concom. So, and meeting with Dover and other things. So I do spend an enormous amount of time on it, so I would like to just finish up one other thing. And then you can do all the talking, because then I'm out of
Found
things.
this to say, I think there's been lots of back and forth. I'd just love to say, let's give this 10 more minutes and then kind of move on to other topics just in the interest of time. Because I suspect we may not achieve total cathartic resolution of all concerns, even in 20 minutes.
I did want to say, if you can support the monitoring, such as what Conservation Commission is doing now, which is a new kind of monitoring that hasn't been done with other projects, but because it's exploratory and because there might be approvals that would be important later on, they've asked for this extra monitoring up front. So if you can support them, and also if it gets to the point of it looking to become a public or any kind of water supply, that if the board makes similar requests as we did with 59 North Main, it would be great to have support for that, so that we could.
Your sort of willingness to let your wells be tested as part of that oversight, which I suspect you would be.
And somehow identifying which wells and how far away do we want to go for the testing, all of that is going to be, there's no formula for that at the moment, so support
We don't
would.
know that, but I think we convinced the Concom to hire a hydrogeologist at the expense of the applicant.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Review the applicant's plans, make recommendations to the Concom. We'll find out next meeting, I think. How far they've gotten with that, but they did agree, I think, somewhat reluctantly, to hire a hydrogeologist.
I would think they'd have to.
Yeah, I can't put words in
Yeah.
Concom's mouth, but I don't think it would be they who are reluctant. I would think it's an issue to, you have to negotiate again, because it's not a firm requirement, so it would be more the applicant getting some agreement, but, yes.
When someone applies to you to drill a private well, you know what they're planning to do, don't you? You don't have any idea of what
No,
else is going on
I mean, this is like
land?
59 North Main, they said, oh, we're gonna drill these wells for these private residences. Oh, what an amazing coincidence, exactly the same wells are gonna be used for this 40B. But wasn't their well approval outside of the purview of the 40B? It was for a totally different lot, that they were simultaneously pursuing both applications, but we can only consider that application despite the fact that they're simultaneously pursuing a 40B.
But
Well,
let me ask
right.
Mark something
Yeah.
that might help. So, normally we see well applications when someone's building a home or redoing their well, and we know it's going to be a private drinking water supply. They're just testing the concept of can they get a certain amount of water from this property, and they're anticipating going to the state level for it. So they're outside of our permitting process at the moment.
That's correct.
And if they, let's just say if they wanted to turn that well into a well for a single-family home, how would they come back to us after the fact?
They would apply with a plan, show location, distances to any environmentally sensitive areas. That would come to the board for approval.
Like
And
the
then they would get a
irrigation
permit to drill, or if it already was drilled, that's unique, then it would go through the pump test and quality and quantity test.
Okay, so we haven't had to issue a permit yet because it's
We
not,
are so far ahead of ourselves on this. When they first came, and it was a well-attended meeting, and everybody said, this is crazy, this is too big, it's not appropriate, we don't like it. There was very little positive feedback. It was a planning board, some time ago, maybe a year and a half ago. It had housing up Hunting Lane in addition to everything that it has now. They've been asked about this additional housing that is up Hunting Lane, behind, I think, beyond where the well testing is happening. They kind of look at their knees and duck their head. They're being coy about what the rest of the property might be used for. Isn't there some way that we can get them to come forth with the entire plan?
I don't think on behalf of the Board
And
of,
it's something that it certainly could be raised in front of.
Is that planning? Who has that?
I think, I think the question for us is, does Board of Health have that? Because I can't say what other boards can or can't do, because it's taken me long enough to figure out what we can do and not do. And so what I would say is, I think for us, I suspect it's not uncommon for sophisticated applicants to choose how they sequence a project and what they communicate at what stage. In this application and many other applications, I think for us, as you go into those residential properties, unless they were tying into those residential properties would fall into our purview for residential wells, for residential septic. I think the larger question of, when they were talking about the select board, the sewage treatment, it's sort of like, okay, this is how many gallons it is. Well, if you do that, this project takes up most of it, so how are we helping downtown? Well, you could do this and this too. Okay, well, that's not what you're talking about. Are you talking about this, or are you talking about that? And I think that sequencing question is one that has lots of implications for this project and sort of what problems it solves and what problems it doesn't solve. I think for us, what's hard is none of those are things that we're the decider for. So I think those are important conversations to have in terms of saying we should know what we're getting when we're giving up something, whether that's, ball field / wastewater treatment facility, or 20,000 gallon per day well, or kind of any other variances for zoning board or whatever. I think we as a community should ask for that. I don't know that we as a Board of Health have an avenue to impact
Is there
that.
any way to change that dynamic?
I think they've bypassed it by the fact that these are all non-private residential pieces to say they now go to the state, not to us.
Well, however, we would have control if we were going to permit them to build a wastewater treatment plant on town land. And so that is.
As a Board of Health or as a town?
No, I'm talking about
Yeah.
as a town.
Right,
No,
as a
yeah,
town,
no,
I
this
think
is
we have
not the
lots of
Board Health.
avenues. I think
Right.
Board of,
But that's still something like, okay, well, if we were going to permit you to construct a wastewater treatment plant on a portion of town property, which might even require a town meeting to have us authorize basically that use, right? Then what kinds of conditions would we put on either well development, or would we require them to supply, all abutters or properties within a certain radius with water? I'm not saying that that's on the table right now, but those are the kinds of negotiations and thought processes that I think we need to, bring to the table. And we're certainly not going to provide them an opportunity to have all the benefit and have the town deal with potentially consequences with no upside. So I think we do have to be pretty
but I
sophisticated.
think the we here is the
It's
town
a
of
town,
Sherborn,
the
not
town.
the
Yes.
Sherborn Board of
See,
Health.
we're extraordinarily regulatory.
Yeah.
We're not a policy.
Right.
We make policy in terms of how we either enforce the regulations or when we add regulations, but we don't have that kind of more discretionary, but we have been trying to weigh in on some of the technical issues, such as and this question can be asked again, but at one of the selectmen's meetings on it, I said it would be helpful to know what else is going to be up Hunting Lane in terms of sizing a wastewater treatment and also understanding what their contribution financially would be to the town to support a plant
Right,
that
because
they're
the whole-
suggesting, because
all
without
of it's not
knowing
bigger.
what the potential flows would be, one could design a plant that gets completely used by only that project and it's a adjacent parcel, and then that advantage that folks are looking for some other downtown businesses or residences or what have you to tie into that might be used up by that further development up Hunting Lane. So that's a really important thing to know before the town is committing
It
to
is,
doing a wastewater
but
treatment plant.
The
But
basic project went from 120 beds to 200 beds.
Well, and what's in those beds has also varied from assisted living to dementia unit, which are really different kind of patient or residential populations in terms of what's the wastewater effluent, what's the community impact, what's the impact on our EMS services. Those aren't the same. And so I think that there's lots of places where there's a lack of specificity in what's been discussed, that sort of broadly speaking, it's this or this. And so I think, I just want to make sure you guys have taken time out of your evening to be here. I would love to kind of say, I think we've shared the information that's shared, but are there other questions or concerns we haven't raised? Yeah.
I just want to say, my experience working with Mark over the last year and a half, I'm new to town, has been exceptional. I mean, I appreciated coming in here a couple of weeks ago and asking for time and having you take the time out of that meeting for me. And I appreciate the education here. One thing that had come to me, and I'd just be looking for any advice, a developer had come to me and mentioned NEPA, and Mass Environmental Protection Act or agency, and they suggested that we should reach out to them, and that while you guys may not have full jurisdiction, that if an abutter had a concern or brought to them, whether that'd be helpful. And
It
I
has
don't
to-
have my education on that agency, I don't know if any of you do.
I've dealt with it on developments. It really is if it's triggered or not, and I'd have to know. I know so little about what this proposal actually is that I couldn't even begin to understand if that was going to be relevant or not, but certainly something that we could look
I think
into.
it was mentioned because there was a lack of information, that the agency would want to have more information, and that might be a way of trying to get some more information. But I just don't have, I'll have to go down the avenue. I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
yeah, I don't know offhand, right, what the threshold is that would trigger that, but
I'd have to look at that too. But
I'm not
it's-
sure if housing is perceived differently as something more innocuous, but that's because so many cities and towns in Massachusetts have either public water supply or sewer system or both. And so they're not facing the same kind of questions that we have here. And when they do have the similar situation of what we have here, it's often in lesser developed areas, like in the western part of the state, so.
And
Are
there-
there interests?
What, me-
What would definitely trigger that? Like, what
Well, it's really about if certain state permits are required, then that would trigger an evaluation. Basically, their goal is to protect damage to the environment and loss of resources. But it's only for projects that have state-required permitting. So again, I just know,
Yeah.
no, well, it depends on what it
Yeah.
depends on what it is, but it's.
I've
it's
only
the
seen it for
executive
more
office.
industrial kind of things, but I don't know.
They do
I
have
don't know
a
about this
good
kind of development.
website. I'd suggest just look it up. You can search it, and it'll explain the definition of what they do. And they actually have their own office, Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act office, so they could probably.
It's in Boston.
There is one example of a 40B where the state permit was actually taken back when it was demonstrated that it was going to endanger the well of an abutter.
Okay, that's why it was not just.
But the problem is it's all out of our purview.
I understand.
But, so what I would say is, I think none of us can say with confidence, yes, it definitely applies, no, it doesn't apply. It may be worth exploring, because we,
Okay, thank you.
are there other questions or issues that sort of weren't raised or addressed?
I just want you to know that the test that the engineer submitted is just a 2-week test on this well. I think it was actually a 2-day test.
Yeah, 2-day has been, often DEP does something more like 5 days, and if I can remember, probably 15 or more years ago, when we were looking at some well issue, maybe it was less. It might have had to do with the Morse Road well or something. I was researching another town out on 495 that had put in a bedrock well, and I went and met with them, and they said it took them 6 months of testing and monitoring the area, so there might have been a different protocol in the past. They said it was enormously expensive to do a bedrock well, and because of the testing requirements and the length of testing that they had to do. But they were desperate in their town for another water supply, so. But it seems, again, the one I know about from being near a client, I think they only tested for 5 days of pumping and monitoring the neighbors, so.
Seasonality,
Yeah.
It depends, if you happen to have the connection, you might.
I just want to table this,
put
because
it
we
in
are
your case.
totally not going to get anywhere different 5 minutes from now from where we are now.
Except they are going to be able to go to meetings and
Right.
speak,
Yeah.
and so the
Yeah.
more they know, I would like you to have it in your
Yeah.
head, so you can express
But
your
I'd also
concerns
say-
about that as well. So.
But you're not, like, I think there's a piece of, they've done this, they're asking us for stuff. So you can say they did 5 days of test, you're asking to put your sewage under a ball field, we would like more than 5 days of tests. Like, this is a piece of a larger suite of things that are being proposed and discussed that I think we as a community should say, is there a set of trade-offs that makes this acceptable for us? That may be different than acceptable to the abutters, it may be the same as acceptable to the abutters, because we should all think of ourselves as being in the same situation you are, because I'd ask the same of you, were I in this situation? And so I think this is a piece where we can say, here's a general guidance. It's not our intent to say you shouldn't ask for something different than that. It's just to say, this is what we know about what's been done in other settings.
And that bedrock fracture may run to one of our houses. We don't know.
Is there a way to know what you guys propose in general? I just.
Oh, you mean for testing?
You have your
Yeah.
concerns, you'll
Yeah.
voice those concerns in certain ways. And then while we have our concerns, is there a way that we learn
So I think for,
what you'd suggest?
right, so anything we do on behalf of the Board of Health would be a public record, and so it should be reflected in the agenda, should be available as a public record. So I'd say, in general, you guys will often be the ones bringing this piece, and we can certainly, we'll post our agendas and would expect these things to be posted. I think one thing I would sort of suggest to the board or the group collaborating between multiple boards is to make sure that these stakeholders kind of know when those meetings are, because that seems like a great avenue to bring those conversations forward, and the transparency therein would certainly be beneficial, and I think, continuing to attend and participate, and I think,
If they're still doing it, I don't even
Right.
know. There hasn't been anything lately, and there was a document that was provided to the project proponent with a list of questions and concerns, but they were very preliminary at that point because the information was very preliminary.
And I
But
guess-
that must be available, I would assume, from George Morrow.
I just didn't know if it was like,
a-
it
any,
was in the hallway
right,
at some
right.
point that you're saying, no.
No, I think, no, but I think,
You send in a document.
if we express something, I think it's typically a memorandum or some other formal communication from the board,
Or we attend.
a meeting.
Right, a select board meeting or planning board or something, so.
But anything we suggest, you should be able to see, because we're a board and that's a public,
I understand.
yeah. Absolutely. Ellen, can I just ask, so I think also, if you had questions about did this come up or other pieces, I think you'd certainly be able to reach out to Ellen to say, have there been any materials generated by the board regarding this in the last month or 2
Oh,
months?
yeah.
So Ellen is
Well,
a great.
The minutes are online, too, so you can just watch.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You guys have a good night now.
Right.
Good night. Okay.
So Mark, while you were gone, we decided you're taking out all the deer.
Get me my.
Yeah, we're gonna use
weapon.
beaver traps so that we've got the right
Deer
scope of
traps.
permitting.
Venison for
Yeah.
all.
Muskrat traps,
I
whatever
did
kind of
learn when
trap.
I asked whether there were adequate archers, since,
Yeah.
having people shooting, I don't know if you saw that France has had yet another death of somebody who got shot by hunters. They were
France.
bicycling
In
by
France.
Yeah.
and, so anyway, so I believe they're using archers in Dover as well, and that's what's ongoing right now in the Rocky Narrows Reservation in Town
Bow hunting.
Forest. So anyway, I said, well, are there enough people to go around to fill that need? And apparently there are 35,000 in Massachusetts registered.
A lot of bow hunters.
I was shocked,
Well,
So,
Fair warning, wear a very high-colored reflective clothing if you're out
Yeah.
walking in the woods.
yeah. Well, right now, the Rocky Narrows trustee of reservations is regulating who goes in, and they have to set up their stands a reasonable distance from any
Trails.
path. And because they are there every day, I think, except Sunday maybe, but check that, there are postings if you're walking around over there.
Should we do Silverwood?
Something else.
Are we going in order?
Yeah, I think Silverwood
Yeah.
makes sense.
Do Silverwood?
Since Mark is here.
We missed you, Mark.
Do you have to
Sorry.
keep?
Yeah, so how did that go with the, did you
Yeah,
get a
yeah, I
chance to
do.
go out
I
together and
think-
inspect?
I forget.
You and the food
I
inspector?
probably should have gone over there and helped. Sorry?
Go check out the game.
Yeah,
Okay, so David is
He's recusing.
Yeah, I
recusing
have to
himself
recuse
because he's in a butter to
Butter.
the property that we're discussing.
Okay, so the day after our meeting, so October 4th.
Last
last
Thursday.
week ago, Thursday.
Yeah.
Beth and I both went out to Silverwood
Mm-hmm.
to check out the actual setup. They do have a beautiful, very large kitchen with 2 ovens, 2 stoves, only 1 sink though, so it's really not set up to be a food service facility. Beth was reviewing the requirements for the various food events with the caterer who was on site, or the person that works for a caterer. And there were 3 interested parties. I think that the 3 were here at our meeting from the event coordinators, I should say. The decision was made that they would bring in catered food, utilize porta toilets, and limit the use in the kitchen to warming, as a warming station, not for food preparation. Well, storage too, as they bring in the catered food. If it comes in Cambros units, which are insulated units, or coolers, they could store it there, but not to be used for preparation. So they all seemed comfortable with that. We had a visitor show up as well, and he was very helpful. Gave some information that he was a previous student within our school system, and I think everyone felt comfortable as a whole as we were discussing everything. Obviously, the owner was there as well, and he wants to see future opportunity. As we told him, it's a step-by-step process, but for the event itself, we sent through that process, information got relayed, and hopefully it'll be successful, and someday, hopefully, they'll have the needs for septic and water. But right now, they don't, so they have to bring in their own water as well.
So did Beth issue basically like a one-day permit, or how's this work?
What has happened, Ellen, on that?
What she told me is they don't need a permit
Oh, if they're just.
because they have a caterer.
Mhm.
Who has a permit?
But typically, I wanted to ask you, Mark,
Yes.
because we typically, in the past, had received a copy of the caterer's
That's
license.
correct.
What we've gotten
For
is
us-
a food establishment permit.
Yeah, they
Not
should be
caterers.
applying with no fee. If
But-
they're a licensed, this is the
But-
way it can work. The state has offered two options. You can either have a caterer come in and get permitted through our town and have them inspected by our town, or you can have them submit their license from where they're situated as a caterer, in this case Wayland. Make sure they're licensed there as a caterer, not just as a restaurant.
Well, that's all
Submit
we
that.
have.
Submit
That's all
that,
we have,
and
though.
submit the certification of food management. Whoever's going to be running the event should be a certified food manager and allergen trained. So those two items should come in with the application. And the reason for all that, if they're not charging, and you don't have to charge, is that if something was to occur, say, where we started getting calls for concerns possibly of a food poisoning event or whatever, we would be ready to call the appropriate officials that are noted on that application. Without that, we wouldn't know the food served, what time. We would be at a loss to chase information possibly the next day. So that's a good policy to have, is that they apply with no fee if you're not inspecting, and with the credentials.
But what do you do if
Caterer's
they don't have,
license.
so I think your point
So
is
what
they
are they
haven't submitted the
applying for?
credentials.
Do they even need to apply? I mean, it
Yes,
sounds.
for the site location. They're coming into our town catering, the state requires they notify
But
us.
what we have is not a caterer's permit.
You can
It's
use the
food
general, you can
establishment.
use the general food establishment.
Okay.
There are checks and little boxes you check at the bottom. You can add it to it. There's
I don't know.
lines.
So does Beth review that, or does?
She has reviewed it.
And she says it's fine?
Well, she just left the pile on my desk.
Yeah.
She didn't
Bless you.
really say.
So we should
I don't
we should
really-
just confirm with Beth. So it sounds like we're generally under the impression that it's fine.
Things are good.
If there's any uncertainty, we should close the loop with Beth
Right.
just to make sure that we feel fully
Contact
comfortable.
info.
So for what the package she left, it had that they're a food
The-
establishment.
there's a food
that
establishment
can also
permit.
cross over to cater, it sounds like,
Okay.
with some provision. And did they leave anything on who would be the manager? Or did they fill out an
Or the allergen
official
testing.
application?
I think they filled out not the food establishment permit application, but the one day, that's
Temporary,
separate, just a couple sheets. And then there's a Serve Safe and an allergen training, and she wrote on it that this person works for,
Okay, so she has
The other person.
provided the contact info?
Yes.
Okay.
And so.
I mean, that's just a different way of doing it,
So-
but
It
same.
sounds like for the gala, it feels like we think we've passed the threshold for the event this weekend to go on okay. And then we're waiting, it doesn't sound like there's something for us to issue in
Right,
terms of the
yeah.
board to vote. And then there's a larger question that the homeowner, the property owner shared in terms of being a public water supply or not. It sounds like that's independent of the question for the gala, because their intent is to not use.
Oh, yes, that's a separate
Right.
issue.
But I guess, so here's my interrelated question. So, I saw the back and forth that Jonathan had with the state, that as long as it's less than 60 events a year, with 25 people, it's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't have to be considered public water supply. So here are my questions. One is, so how do we sort of confirm that they're going to limit the number of events to less than 60? Because that needs to be somewhere, right? Because right now they have the authority to hold events there, are planning, people probably.
And that was
then-
actually more of our concern.
Right,
When we
just-
said they needed to talk to the state, it wasn't, we already knew that rule about 60
Right,
days
so-
and
so
25
what-
But it's
people. It
also the question
was,
of like, if you're using this as a wash kit, like if you're
Well,
using.
right, so that was going to be
the CSA,
my
yeah.
other interrelated questions are, so for each event, do we need to go through this sort of confirmation that, without septic, do they have, sufficient porta potties? Does Beth need to sort of review on a per-case basis? They could technically have 58 or 59
Right.
events a year. Do they need to check in with the board and get something from Beth and Mark signing off on the procedures every single time? Or is there something like on an annual basis that can be established so that, it's clear what's going to be needed, it's streamlined, it's efficient, and everybody
I think, like,
understands?
Part of the trick is like.
60 days.
But I think it's
remember.
also like, you have a resident, so I think the issue is, to me, so I think that I share those questions. I think the other piece, though, is that they functionally have a residential septic system and infrastructure. They haven't pursued permitting or.
Right, so they're going to need
Identification,
porta potties
right.
and things like that.
I think once they need that, like, my recollection for Sweet Meadow is we needed to do that for the camp. We would need to do the camp this year. But if you had 5 camps, like the soccer camps, I think we said each of those is an independent inspection because it's different staff. And so it seems like.
But there's a difference between, so there's several issues. So with a camp, you're getting into
Right,
things like
you're
health
yeah.
forms and things like that. So
Right.
it's not exactly the same, but my question is, if they're going to be, can we come up with something that's streamlined that says, because you don't have adequate septic for these kind of events, that you're going to commit to this number of porta potties per X people, that the sink use is going to be limited to X, that only licensed caterers are going to be used that have the allergen
But
training and this.
how do we
I
verify
think on the
that?
caterer front, I don't see how we could short-circuit that because
Yeah,
Every
each one
time-
has to be checked.
The menu, and you need to
And the
get the
menu.
menu.
So even if they use the same, like they said, we're going to only use 3 caterers every single time, they would still need to submit?
Yes.
The menu might be different.
Yeah,
It's
the-
not
So
gonna
it's a
be.
menu by menu basis? And so, because Beth needs to understand, like, well, if it's this, it needs to be kept
Right.
at this
So I feel like
temperature.
we've got a raw bar that's different than if we've got barbecue.
So does anyone even understand that that's the case? Because it didn't really seem like.
Well, I think there's a set of questions. I think the gala
We have
organizers
covered,
are
yep.
one cohort. I think the larger question of what does
How are
it
we
look
gonna do
like for
this?
Silverwood
Yeah.
to be able to provide the event venue? Looks like it's one that's extended back over many years with septic and water being questions. And so I think the question of, looking back, it was like in 2000, there's at least some discussion with
10
the board to
years
say,
ago,
we're going to
2008.
notify the board of events, or that was the ask of the board. It doesn't sound like
And that
that's
was
been.
the agreement.
Right. It sounds like that
And it hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened. I think it's then the question of, what does it need to look like to be compliant? And I think the separate question that I don't know how to answer is, if the CSA is having a weekly disbursement for 6 weeks a year, or, 6 months a year, like, if we're actually, like, what's the oversight we need to do of a farm who's washing lettuce? Like, they said, that's why we're putting in this barn, we're putting water in the barn is to wash lettuce. If you say I'm doing that a bunch of times, and then I'm also having 30 events, it seems like from a practical standpoint, we're having a number of exposures that I suspect the average CSA disbursement is more than 25
So
people.
the CSA is still operating?
The CSA is not,
No, they
what the
changed
owner
it.
told me is he stopped
Because
utilizing it.
otherwise, they're
No.
over.
No, no, no,
they're
they-
over
they-
25
But I think that's the
people,
thing we need to
60
be able
days
to
a
like
year, yeah.
explicitly say.
What he's doing is he's selling wholesale.
Right, he's selling
He
to like
produces
the markets.
and he sells to market.
Mm-hmm.
But I just, and Daryl may be helpful on this, because you dealt with it for years. I thought it was 60 days, not 60 events. 60 days out of the year.
Yeah.
Yes.
So does that mean within a time period? I thought it was like for camps and so forth. That's why they made it 60 days for summer camp, so they wouldn't have
It
to.
says it per year. I mean, it does say on an
60
annual
per
basis.
year.
So
Yeah.
it could be sporadic through 60 days in
Yeah.
a year, wow, okay.
But, yeah.
So I think one thing, whoever is the authority regarding the recent change that even allowed this farm to be used for
Wasn't
events
that the
like this, I don't know if that
zoning?
was planning, I'm not
Do you
sure.
remember?
I can't
Zoning,
remember.
I believe.
I thought it was zoning too.
Okay, so I think that now that we've seen what's been kind of the unanticipated issues arising, that maybe as a board, we need to approach them and say things like, we need to make sure that anyone who holds these kind of events at their property is informing anyone coming to use it of all the requirements so that we're not catching people at the 11th hour.
Right.
And that there has to be that reporting back about each individual event that's taking place. And, all that has to be tracked, something so that we understand what's going on for how we need to be regulating.
Yeah, because
And I think also
the
just-
usage zoning changed from agricultural to assembly, so that, to me, says it was the zoning department. And then they contemplated hosting 30 to 40 events per year. But it just seems to me like if it's going to be sort of a similar scenario every time, that we could just come up with a clear set of, okay, so here's sort of the ground rules.
I can
And
see on the septic side.
Yeah, on the
I don't
septic.
know if they did something like they're going to lock the bathrooms that are there so that no one is using them, they're only using the porta
Yeah, they didn't
potties, and they're
mention lock.
going to block off the sink so no one's
Yeah,
using the
They
sink.
didn't mention that either.
But I think
Yeah,
that's a
so
piece
those
that we
might
kind
be
of need
things
to.
that could be built into that, and then, but the
Like
caterers,
standard operating
it sounds
procedure.
like we can't
Right.
short-circuit that too easily.
Well, I don't think the intent is short circuit. I think it's just streamlined. But I think it's a question of, broadly speaking, if this were a restaurant, we'd have a structure to regulate them
Right.
that would say, here is a set of ground rules. Is there a similar strategy we can take as an
That's my
assembly
question,
site?
right, like,
That would sort of set the parameters to say, you need to do this is a schedule of inspections. And how do we integrate that with what may be a variable catering staff,
right.
Well,
Or
but
they redo their septic and they can support the kitchen and the visitors, and then we're
They
done.
might need some additional sinks, but just so you know, the state code requires all caterers to notify all events. So a caterer cannot just come into a town.
Except a private party,
Well, if
things
you-
like that are exempt.
Well,
but-
if you
But I
have
think
like
if you're
your
saying this
house
is- right.
party, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
But I think this is saying this is a site made for
It's
public
assembly,
assembly.
right.
And so I think in that setting, this would not apply even if it were a group of.
And also,
private-
and to me, I mean, the implication is this is now a commercial use. I mean,
Right.
they're getting compensated
But I think
for-
independent of the compensation, like I think the
It's commercial
compensation or
use.
donation.
Yeah.
Like for me, if we're saying it's a health, it's like what's the exposed people and how are they connected to each other? And if they're a sort of public assembly,
Mm-hmm.
it's different than if you say I'm having a dinner party with my family.
Right.
It's like having an American Legion or a VFW. It's no different. Where those caterers, when you have the caterers come in, have to notify the town that they're in that town.
And so for us, if we were notified by the caterer that they were here, that it sounds like we don't need to, we may provide an inspection were it to be necessary for their
is
concerns,
correct.
but we're not required to do so.
Yeah, the state has said if you charge, you should do an inspection. I've been through
Right.
this before with the state. If you don't charge, at least get their credentials.
Which is
And so
what
do we feel-
what you were recommending, certainly for the
It's up to the
dollar.
town how you want to handle that.
And so I guess for us, so I think your question would be, if there was a set group of caterers to say, this is one of the recommendations we'd make, then it seems like we could feel comfortable. Like for us, it's a question of if we as a town are spending money on Beth's time to reconcile and review these materials, we shouldn't be subsidizing a commercial or private venture.
That's right.
That's, got 40 events a year that we're doing for free, but we're still providing oversight
Should have a
to.
nominal fee for the
Right.
review.
And if we have but I think it's a question of, if we have the review, is there something like there's an annual charge for the involved caterers? We'd encourage you to use it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
so that
that's
we
what
can
I'm
just
trying,
kinda
that's what
check
I'm
in.
wrestling with,
Right.
because it's somewhere in between, it's not a one-time event,
Right.
so we're not in that realm, but it's also not a
But the
restaurant
oversight-
or like a.
Well,
so
the
the
oversight's a
typical-
catering license. Like,
Right.
there's a state body to say, you have a catering license, thus there's a set of oversight and regulation that you're subject to.
That is
And for
correct.
us, it's a question of how much do we need to duplicate that versus validating it? And you may say, I haven't worked with this caterer before as a town of Sherborn. We just want to check to make sure we've got the allergy paperwork, these things. And
Menu.
right. And so
But the menu, to me, that's kind of the problematic piece, because you're not going to make people say, oh, well, by the way, so you can only use these 3 caterers. That's okay, because lots of
so
places
you could
tell you
just
that.
submit the menu, but you don't have, I don't know that we have to approve the menu.
So, I know we don't have to approve it, but does Beth have to check something, like we were just saying, like, what happened if someone wants to, for example, have a raw bar?
But I think your
Something. Does
point,
she
Mark,
need
is we
to-
need the information so that if an event happens, we're
somebody
able
gets
to
sick.
adjust it, but I don't think
Okay.
we're having to
So
approve it
it's
to make sure.
literally notification
Right.
versus review and
And so-
having to sort of approve anything or make sure
what if-
that they're doing.
So
okay.
what if we said
Well, that
each,
makes it
And it may
easier.
entail a phone call to the caterer to say, listen, be aware, porta toilets, bring your own hand wash sink, da-da-da-da.
well, so I think I think that, just kind of thinking through your point, it seems like from a
SOP.
water and sewage standpoint, it sounds like we feel like there's blanket guidance we could
Yeah.
provide, that we would want to have some inspection schedule to confirm was actually happening, because it gets tricky. Like, I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, we said to do this, we did no enforcement, and you just always use the toilets, which are totally not designed for this flow. I think we need to have some piece of oversight, whether that's in the purview of the oversight of the catering or other pieces. But it seems like there's general guidance we could give based on head count to say you should have X, Y, and Z. The public water supply sounds like we would need systematic reporting to say these are the reported events. We should be able to validate that, because if the catering submitted appropriately, then we have dual ways that this is reported.
But then also, we're confirming if we're requiring notification prior to each event, then we're obviously going to be able to confirm that indeed
number of
less than
events,
60
right.
events is occurring a year. But I do think it would be great to just come up with sort of a little cheat sheet of sort of SOP in terms of, handling the septic. I don't think that it's complicated. I just think we want to be black and white,
The
clear,
caterers
so
aren't even the
everybody
septic, right? Like that,
understands it.
like if the Silverwood Farms is the, like, are they in LS, like, what are they? There's something or other, right? Like, if they're now saying Silverwood Organic Farm is hosting this service, like the caterer is not responsible for the toilets or the water. They're responsible for the food, and I feel like the
The
site's
event, whoever's holding
I think the
event.
property owner who says, I'm hosting this and bringing this into the septic system, this is their SOP that I think relates to the septic and the water.
Right.
And I think for the notification, the caterer's a piece of it, and I think we'd also ask the property owner to say, here's the expectation, because if it is 60 events, that changes. And if there's no oversight, it's amazing how many places have 57 events. Like, there needs to be active reporting, because your system is in
Well,
existence.
I think that's fair, and I think we should just make that.
And
I
think for
think
the
we
key-
might want to consider having
Council?
spot checks.
I
Somehow
was gonna
build
say that
in,
too.
because
Yeah.
the seriousness of if they are using
Toilet.
It's
the
a real
existing
issue.
bathrooms, that's not fair to the neighbors or anybody else or to them.
Right.
And DEP has been
Well,
quite
the
clear
system
on
isn't
that.
designed
And
to-
so I think we
Yeah.
probably have to have that kind of check and check the sink.
Checks and
So-
balances.
And I think
And
the
I think it would
caterers-
be wrong not to ever go out and.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I
And
agree, but.
And I think
Oh,
for
I
the
agree.
caterers,
Spot
it's to
check.
say, like, my 2 cents is I think each caterer needs to be inspected once a year, but,
That's a good idea.
so that you can just say, we just want to validate you've got these pieces and that we're actually having that conversation with you. But if you're using the same caterer 20 times, I think that we can say, we're going to validate this with the spot check. The other pieces, we're going based on the caterer license and the notification of the menu, and that's driven by the state, and that's fine. We're just saying, we want to make sure that the ducks are in a row and that we're appropriately compensating the agent's time, and we're not asking the town to subsidize this private or
And
commercial venture.
and also, so depending on the size of the event, obviously, so I can't remember what the stipulation for the porta potties is, but,
Well, we were
the-
saying 50 people, one porta toilet, but I just spoke to the library event coordinator and said, you're having over 100, so 3, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to consider a ADA specialized porta toilet, so it could count as your third, because they were having 125 people. And that's just a general standard.
So like one per 50
50.
people and one ADA per event.
Yeah, I think that would
Something
be
like that.
appropriate.
And I think And I think that would be our guidance. I think like if they wanted more, great. But I
That's
think
a
our piece
minimum
is like, you
standard,
can't
yeah.
use the toilet.
Yeah.
Like the septic is not for event
Right,
usage.
and so, so the tricky part is that, you know, when there aren't events, there are, you know, a nominal number of farm workers there who are completely entitled to use the bathroom when they're there, so.
That's what that was meant for originally.
Right, so during the day and during the week, it's, obviously, that's
Should be
an appropriate use, and the
that's what
septic's
was built
designed
and
for that.
designed and
Right.
approved for.
So, I think as part of the spot checks, obviously, though, but confirming that the toilets are basically blocked somehow during the public events to, you know, ensure that there's not inappropriate use and that people really are using the porta potties.
So do we ever have inspections during an event? I know there's checking
Oh, yeah.
beforehand, but
Library,
to stop
just
by
for
and-
example, your library event, that you have your vendors, they're checked. They're a temporary type event. They're not caterers, but they're temporary. But it's treated like temporary to that degree because they don't have water nor sewer. So they need to bring their portable hand sinks and dump the excess water into the porta toilets
Right.
and treat it no different than we do like the library fair or other fair, outside fairs. Until they can get their water and sewer approved, it would have to be treated that way. And yes, we do inspect them, to get back to your question.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, right in the middle of an event.
Oh, yeah, I've been in,
Yeah.
you like to get there early and then
Yeah.
pass through again.
But I think but I would also say like, I think the goal
Not
here
every
is to
time,
not
but-
be disruptive or intrusive.
no.
And so I think it's just to kind of say a spot check. It's not to sort of interrupt a gala
Just
or
it's
wedding.
confirmatory.
Hey, who's in
It's
that
confirmatory, and it's not meant to be punitive, it's just meant to be confirmatory, and that way, everybody can feel comfortable that,
And I think
you
this
know,
is
there's no
independent of Silver, like, I think
transgression.
Silverwood is the first instance that we're having this conversation about, but with the sort of zoning and assembly.
Right,
Like,
and that's
those
why, if the
changes-
infrastructure was just there for this, it would be much easier.
Right.
Oh, it would be.
But to
It would be
have
so much
the-
easier.
But we could have
this
other farms that
risky
ask the same
situation.
question now that the zoning pieces have happened. And so I think our goal is to both address the questions and concerns that are specific to Silverwood, but to define a larger policy and approach that we could apply consistently between applicants or locales.
And do we establish some sort of a policy, I guess, with CBA so that they know that when changing use designations take place, when they need to notify us of things?
Well, I think,
Would be a bad
Or
idea.
is that something?
I
because
think it
I've-
would be nice to work with somebody on just getting a few more ground rules in place.
Yeah.
I think when it came up, I mean, I have to say, I just didn't really know what it was going to mean to have
No.
Yeah.
events,
No.
because
Right.
all the
I
talk
mean,
was
I
focused
think
around
just-
noise
Right.
at the time. So I wasn't thinking about that they would be serving meals.
Right.
I don't know, singing music, I don't know, who knows? So then we have to
Right.
catch up and fill in with what we've learned from experience.
considerations, yeah, that these are the issues, like septic,
And from a water supply, but from a water
catering.
supply standpoint, if there are less than 60 events a year, is there anything they need to do with their water supply? Like, let's say they truly have 40 events a year. Their water supply right now should be fully like, they shouldn't need to do anything else for us to approve their water supply for 40 events. It's just a demonstration of the absence of 60 events.
Yeah, I think so, right?
And so.
Except the water goes down the sink.
That's-
So that's where this
That's
whole
separate.
issue of that,
Yeah,
that it's
that's
not to be
right.
used for food preparation,
Right.
because then you're talking about not just
the septic.
incidental use of water,
Right.
you're talking about higher,
Actual-
and then it's
and
going
actual
down
flow.
the
But they
sink
can
and.
It's tricky
drink the
there.
water, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So it gets tricky, so if they turn on the sink, they're using the septic.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And at the
Unless they're
same
drinking.
time, we do require, if they were a facility, a food facility, it would be nice, as said, the septic system would triggers all this, but if they were, they would be testing their well yearly to make sure the quality results meet our codes.
And if they.
And they're not right now.
And if they wanted to do commercial kitchen or food prep, right? Like they
Then
don't.
they'd be in the septic.
But well, would they be in the septic though? Even for food prep, independent of head count, they would be in the like, what's the septic?
Because it's triggering commercial
Yeah.
use, isn't it a different?
The kitchen really isn't built to do commercial warewashing of
But I
fruits
think
and
my question is
vegetables.
if they say, we want, like right now, we've seen, as you look back over the 20 years, a significant evolution of the property and its use. And so, right, you sort of see like, oh, we're gonna do this to have.
Right, but
Washington-
commercial use actually has, it's a different standard for septic. It's not, we're going beyond the
But
residential
like, we have people who have,
design.
like, my mom had, I mean, again, this was in Oregon, but like, for her to have a commercial kitchen was not changing, like, it was, she had a series of steps she had to jump through, but it wasn't, she was a restaurant. It was, I have to jump through these things to prepare food.
Does she
for
have
consumption.
private septic?
I mean, she was like in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. I think you can like light pickup trucks on
Oh,
fire and
okay.
it's okay. And so, but I guess my question is, if they said if I'm a caterer, I don't have to change the septic at my site of food preparation. I have to satisfy the food prep requirements. And so I guess my question is, if they said we wanted to change, like, let's say we resolve the water issue,
Mm-hmm.
are we then gonna face something where they're then like, okay, now we're gonna do food prep? And is the food prep independent of head count, or,
If food prep would still require the septic system to be
Yeah, it's-
upgraded for the use of that
okay, because
kitchen.
it's a
It's
change in
always-
use.
Change in use.
Right.
Now, the other
And then
question,
there are
Flow requirements.
And that goes back to the.
Flow
volume
requirements.
that you're
Right.
doing, but
And-
also for the permits that get issued to people who are, there's someone in town baking bread, I think, or something, they
Yeah.
have to do a water quality test as
Yes.
part of their
Yeah.
permit. So that would.
Like
Yeah.
sodium?
And the
Yeah.
driver for
Yeah,
this would be
there's
that, going back to the guidance we got from the state, was that now that we're no longer using this as a residential facility, that's a change of use piece where you can no longer say,
Well, the flow rates are different, everything's
Right.
different, so.
okay.
and just so you know, there was the question from the owner while we were there, it just came to mind as we're talking the septic, if the possibility was there for a tight tank. And I explained to him, unfortunately, the state of Massachusetts frowns on tight tanks. If a septic field can be put in, it has to be for new construction. This would be considered new construction, change of use. And unfortunately, a tight tank is not allowed unless it's the ultimate, only chance of getting a repair completed at an existing house or facility. This is a change in use, so I told him tight tanks are out. They're not allowed in Massachusetts.
So is there a threshold? What if they have one wedding that has 250 guests?
That's 5 porta toilets.
Yeah, it doesn't.
No, but it
So-
still counts as just
One
one
event.
day.
Right,
Right.
so it doesn't
Over
matter to
25 people.
DEP, the size of an event doesn't matter as long as
It
there
would
aren't
if,
more.
it would if we were trying to, if they were trying to change
Yeah,
the
do the
septic,
septic, 'cause
yeah.
the number of
So this way,
seats
they can't really use the
Right.
sinks, they can't
Yeah.
use the toilets, they have to bring in porta potties and hand rinse stations.
Which is fine,
Right, so,
because that's manageable.
well, it's not
it's much more-
impacting
Right.
the septic system, so.
And hopefully, there are fancy porta toilets out there. They're on trailer trucks.
Yeah, oh, they're getting really amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, but it's nice because there's an option that we can recommend that's not either impossible, unrealistic, impossible,
Exactly.
or
And even,
extremely onerous.
and even for the,
Composting toilets?
Yeah.
Do we have any regs on
we
this?
talked about that, and the only problem with composting, you still have to get rid of your gray water, the sink water, so composting toilets.
But can't you just get that pumped out or something?
Well,
So
you-
they could, if they put in composting toilets, you get some reductions in your leaching field, I believe, as long as you can demonstrate that you could put in a fully compliant system
Yes,
if you
thank you.
needed to.
I was just curious, because
But,
they're
you know-
pretty big, right? That's a whole
Yeah.
sustainable movement.
I think
I've
it's
been
harder
pushing
to
them
rent
for
those.
years. We had one in town, they took it
Yeah.
out.
They took it out?
Where?
Yes.
Was it?
And there's another option, if they bring in a caterer that's on wheels, they have portable, those are
Like
different.
food trucks?
Yeah, they have tanks. Those tanks are allowed because they're on wheels. Tanks on these trailer trucks, they have permanent, almost like bathrooms in them. They have sinks. They have tanks. Those tanks are allowed. The tank that's not allowed is the underground tank for the facility. That's what DEP will not allow. But if you brought in a trailer truck, they had, bathrooms with hand sinks, that's fine. It all goes to tanks on a mobile unit, so.
So
It's a
what's,
possibility.
what's our action item on this? I think we've had a robust discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the applicant, I think what we're trying to think about is what does this look like to be successful? I still think it's incumbent on Silverwood to say, I'd like to pursue this. Because I think right now, the sort of guidance that has been provided specific to the gala in some ways serves as communication to Silverwood that from the Board of Health's perspective, this is required. I guess the question is, if there's a wedding a month from now with a caterer and there's no communication to the Board of Health, what is the Board of Health's recourse? Because I think my expectation would be that the caterer and that the site would provide appropriate notifications. And so I guess that's my question, I guess, for you,
So
Mark,
if
is-
we found out a wedding occurred or an event, and the
public-
caterer didn't notify us, the caterer is in violation of the state food code.
Okay. And so I think,
And then we tell them they are, and it's the caterer's responsibility in
Okay.
that respect. The owner should be working with us as well, because just like let's say a hall for veterans,
yeah,
they're also required to tell you they have a caterer coming in. So that it's a two-way street for both the caterer to let us know and the owner of the facility.
So sounds like we could use, a guidance sheet for some things that are already definitely in place, and then we need to think about what other things we want to require, and what would we need to do if we want to have new kind of permit fees, different levels for different level of
That's
review?
a regulation hearing.
Okay, so we should include that in our
Should-
target
Right.
for.
Start thinking about what you'd want.
Okay,
and-
and then it sounds like we should make sure that they know it's coming up. And maybe this first one, just in case there's been some misunderstanding, because I think there's been a bunch there, that they really know that they can't use those bathrooms that are already there, and
and I felt
Which
like
was-
we
you
emphasized
or
that
Beth
last
could
time.
maybe go too, but I think it's
Which was
this
explained
Saturday
to them.
night, whether one of you could go and just check and make sure that it's been able to be implemented the way.
I mean, I'd be glad to go, but I think, and I'm not trying to
I
pin it on
think
Beth, but
was
Beth
planning
would
to
want.
go.
Oh, good,
Okay.
good,
I do
Okay,
think she was
excellent.
planning to.
good. Because the food's going to be the major part of it, and making sure the door's locked for the bathrooms. If she feels that she needs assistance and awkward about it, then I can offer
Okay,
my
but if she's
assistance as
going,
well.
that's
And I
perfect.
just
You
want
can
to
make
make
a
sure
week
the
in
applicant,
advance.
like, I just want to make sure, I think our intent for all
Applicant
this
knows
is to
running
be
away.
transparent and
I
foreseeable.
think she
So- so they- so-
Beth told
What about
them
just a
that she
phone
would be
call?
coming.
Told gala or.
Yeah,
For the
the
first
gala.
event, I'd
Okay.
recommend an inspection.
Okay.
And it
You've got-
shouldn't
you've
be
got it
something
for-
that
Could
should
even
be
put,
disruptive.
they
It's
could even just
check.
put a simple sign that they could keep on the bathroom saying, not, guest
public
use
use.
prohibited, or, no public use. So
Right.
obviously, the people who
Right.
work at the farm know
Yeah.
that they can use it,
Yeah,
but.
'cause
How
they're
many
the
bathrooms are
workers.
present in the barn?
From what I could see, too.
Okay.
They're beautiful, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
The
it's-
building's
It's
beautiful.
really nicely
Everything's
done.
top notch.
Yeah, it really is. Even the kitchen was like, wow.
And is there anything we need to do to respond to Mr. Hudson Walker about the public water supply communication he supplied from Thomas Mahan, or is
I-
that just informative?
I think, again, just saying, we understand this, and that, I think that having this affirmatory notification, and just laying out the few things that we just discussed here, saying,
Kind of plan
here's
next steps.
how we understand or anticipate, moving forward and working with you to ensure the success for
And I think
everybody.
making transparent, like, this is not just about your property, it's about the general approach and policy for kind of sites of assembly that aren't restaurants or don't have this, right? Because none of this is specific to Silver, like, I think Silverwood
it's
is
a
where the questions
protocol.
come up, but the intent is to not say,
Yeah.
this is the Silverwood policy, but this is the policy for this type of use and this type of facility.
Now, there is something they could use that water for if it was tested, and that would be, say they want to offer water at the tables. It's not being disposed of.
Right.
So they could use it there, but I would definitely make that known in the letter. It can't be until tested per our requirements.
Okay.
'Cause,
Or to make like coffee or tea.
And that would be
right?
Yeah,
tested,
because it's
our
no
requirements.
disposable, as long as they don't pour anything in the strings.
But I guess what are
Water toilet.
what are requirements in that setting? Is that the restaurant requirement? Because like my well, I'm not required to test.
It is the restaurant. It's our food establishment codes locally. Our local codes say you have to test your water if you have a food establishment.
And I
That's what
guess
it's based
if I
on.
were him, I'd say, what makes this, like, if I have it once, like, what's the difference between saying I'm a restaurant and I'm a public water supply?
Isn't it food preparation? Like,
Well, you said public water supply.
Yeah, those
So-
are two-
no, no,
those are
but- so I
different
guess-
issues.
So I guess
Different.
my
Right.
question is, if I'm him, is it, like, who's the cohort of people that I'm serving water to that requires me to get well testing beyond what I need to do for residential
And
well?
it should be both his workers and his patrons. Even though, I don't know what the farm codes call for, but, they should know what they're drinking. It should be
Right.
tested.
But I think, like, if I were him, I'd ask and say, like, okay, why?
Food prep for consumers, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it
But if
is.
also- And so if they're serving.
Yeah, you're serving the public.
Okay. And so we'd assert that since you're serving this water for drinking, even if it's for 20 events a year, you need to test it, though you're not a public water supply and you're not a restaurant. Like, what's our basis? Like, I don't disagree with that, I just want to know what our basis is, because that was kind of the question they asked.
Because it's it's not the state jurisdiction when it's.
But
in
like,
the
do we have
public.
do we have a Sherborn reg that
It's,
says?
we have to do, no, that we do.
Right,
Does
Ellen?
this fit
To get a
under-
food permit, you need to test your water, correct?
Yeah, no, we
And if
have
you
to.
only serve
And even
water,
though
if
it's
you need a
not
permit.
food, it's water, but
Jurisdiction.
can that still be
Yeah.
captured under that permit officially?
Yep,
But
as long as
we're
it's
not-
not
Yeah.
disposed of, as long as they don't dispose it, because there's no disposal.
I know, then it's a net loss of water.
Yeah.
But if they wanted to serve their water, whether or not it was 20 events or 60 events, they would need a food permit to do so. If they had a food permit, then they could use their
Well,
water
and
for drinking for
it-
public
Or do they
event.
not?
It's a good point you bring up, because if their workers are using that water for daily consumption, then we're running into a situation of more than 60 days.
No. First of all, that's less than 25 people.
Right.
Second of
Oh,
all,
okay,
two of their
okay.
people live
Yeah,
there and the
right.
residents.
I
So
forgot about the
I think
25.
the workers are fine.
I just want to make
don't
sure,
even-
like, if we're saying you have to have a food permit to give a glass of water, to me, that seems
Yeah.
strange. It may be strange but appropriate.
I thought it
but-
was really about if food preparation for public consumption is
That I
happening.
get, but what if they say, no, the caterer just doesn't want to bring 70 gallons of water
Yeah,
in?
that's what I'm
They'd like
thinking.
to use the sinks with their
Yeah,
delicious
I don't see
Sherborn
why
water.
that would be an
As
issue.
long as they don't dispose in the sinks.
Okay, and so in that case, we wouldn't ask them to do well testing, though they would be.
Oh, no, we would. They're using that for consumption.
Right, but what, so are we saying if I serve water, I need a food permit?
Yes,
Okay,
yes. Water is a food, and that means they have to test that water.
perfect. So I think that would be our pieces. You could use your water.
Specifically, that permit should say for water use only,
Right,
because they don't have facilities for anything but.
okay. And so if they wanted to use their water for drinking, they would need a food permit for water. If
At the
they-
events.
They can't use their water for
For
food
assembly.
preparation because it goes down a sink that is the
There you
septic
go.
issue.
Unless they have holding
I just wanted to define it because
Right,
it's
to
clear that was one of his
clarify, right,
pieces
because if we
of like,
explain it,
I'm not a
then
public.
That's
water
why I
supply.
think a memo or something
All
that
right,
just.
so
Right.
I don't know if you've been able to capture all these.
No.
I can work with that one.
Would you be able to draft?
Sure,
like,
I can work
what we've
with that
talked
one.
about?
I think it's only a
All right,
few
so-
really key points.
I'll need her notes, but another point I just thought of, if you have, say, a mobile unit coming in, they may want to use your water as long as it goes in the tanks, and that's another reason why you want to test it. Because some of these trucks they have 10% more flow in the tank
that
storage
hurts.
than they do in the storage water,
Although I
so,
think if it can be
just kinda want a
captured
food
under the
truck.
food permit,
yep, they
that
can
would be
easily do
great.
that. Yep,
I could believe there's maybe a gray area
yeah.
if they only want to provide it to fill up a tank in the porta potties for hand washing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, they do bring on, some events, they have the steps you can step on and wash your hands, and if they want to bring
Things I'm
those
finding
empty,
out.
then they could use that for that, and you want to make sure they
And
wash.
they wouldn't have to.
Well, their hands, they
necessarily-
should have sanitary water, so it should be tested. you
I know, should be,
Yes.
but is it required to be?
They have to use potable water in hand washing facilities.
Okay, so if the folks providing the porta potties want to verify that they are providing potable water for
They-
hand washing,
yeah.
then they need to get some water quality results.
Or
from
they use
the
public
farm
water.
To be
Oh,
able to
from the
say.
farm, that is, yeah.
So then it's almost more.
To be honest,
on-
usually they bring those in with the water in them, but the opportunity could be there, and it would save maybe some time and effort.
And the hand sanitizer with no
Yeah.
water.
I
That's
feel
what-
really good about what we've arrived at.
It's difficult, because they're running
Water is
a
food.
quasi.
Those are important.
Type
Wash your hands
facility.
after you use a porta john.
Exactly, but if you have, I mean, if the water
I hope he
supply
gets
is
a septic
contaminated and
someday.
they wash their hands with a water that has E. coli in it.
I know, that's what we were just talking about.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah, so, I mean, that's,
This
people
sounds
will
like,
understand it if we explain it that way.
Right,
it's
we're
not-
just trying to draw the line of
Right.
where does the requirement fall, because
if you need a new
we could
regulation.
say a million times, it's in your interest to protect yourself, that
Right.
you're not exposing people to water that's dangerous.
Right.
But no, it may not, we don't
Yeah.
want people to get sick and then have them have that realization.
And I always get confused with
It's
the
good insurance. And it's not
25
that
people. I'm
expensive for
glad
the
you said
basic.
something on it.
So it sounds like, Mark, do you feel like you have the thoughts of the board to the degree that you need?
Yeah, Ellen took them all down, so we can put a letter together.
She's like,
She's just used like 10 pieces of
I've got a
paper.
few
I can
letters.
get most of the,
Water is food, hand washing's good. And then
think
what else,
we can-
what else do we have on the
pro
agenda?
And we have the magic of it being on tape. So regulatory updates, I didn't bring anything new.
Okay.
Had other things going on, unless anyone else does. And if...
Can I just ask one question for the cesspool regulation? I'm trying to remember what we arrived at in terms of version 1, A or B, were we zooming in?
Yeah,
on
she
one
didn't
version?
write it all out, so I kind of remembered that I agree with her that we shouldn't give people a year to fix things. I
Right.
totally agreed
But
with
version
everything.
A and B are
But I couldn't
explicit.
remember
Like-
either.
Like she
You
commented
decided
on,
A.
and she
and
responded to B.
Yeah,
So her comments are on the Rhode
Yeah.
Island rule where we
Yeah.
were
That
moving
it
towards the
didn't
Dover
matter.
rule.
Yeah.
So I think our questions for Beth are, what are your thoughts on the Dover rule that we've adapted to
A.
Sherborn? Which is
And she
A,
didn't
which she responded to
respond
B.
to
And so I think we just need Beth's 2 cents on B, on A.
right.
For anybody that's interested,
What's the score?
Yes.
Oh,
I have everyone's attention now?
Yes.
2-1 Red Sox, top of the third.
Nice.
Is this?
Porcello is pitching against
all
Morton.
right, so do we have any other agenda items? for
Yeah,
next?
this, well,
What's this wastewater treatment services Inc. that's in here?
Oh, that's taken off the
yeah,
agenda.
it got taken off, I noticed that.
Because he renewed his contract.
Oh, okay. I was wondering what happened, I was hoping it was a happy
Wait,
ending.
what are you saying?
so if someone,
It was on your draft
Yeah.
agenda
Yeah,
and
but
not on the final.
Because they had a system that required it.
board will
and-
usually send a letter if it's needed.
Right,
It's
no, I
off
read
the
it. I
agenda.
read it, I just don't remember, so.
It was someone
It's not on
that
the
broke their
agenda.
Yeah, yeah,
agreement.
it doesn't matter.
Got it,
Let's-
got it.
All set. Thank
Yeah.
you. Please, so.
And I did look at the construction management plan
Yeah.
for 59 North Main Street. Daryl?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Oh,
gotta
yeah,
get
we
those
didn't do the
actions.
Yes.
2 added items because
Yeah,
we're waiting.
so
Okay,
I did have a couple comments on that. I looked at
Okay,
that.
and Mark, I think, did you have comments on the construction management plan?
No, I have no.
Okay,
I
comments
did.
on it.
Okay,
Only a couple, though.
all right.
What I notice is under item 6, where they talked about dust, stormwater, erosion, and sediment management, the standard that applies is no visible emissions. And so they just said, water will be sprayed and sweeping will be performed when necessary to keep any potential dust issues under control. It was exceedingly vague. The NESHAP's requirements actually, that there'll be no visible dust emissions, and if there are, that's when you have to start spraying with water and/or amended water to keep the dust suppression down. And this is something that I've noticed be problematic at other construction sites throughout town, that the people doing the construction, there have been huge dust clouds that I've seen generated, no water or anything. So I think they should be very explicit that there will be, as required by the NESHAP's regulations, there will be no visible emissions of dust, and that water and amended water will be used to suppress it. And then the other piece which caught my eye was construction blasting, item
that
12.
caught my eye, yeah.
So blasting, if any, will be in a manner approved by the fire department and building department to prevent injury or property damage. Well, nothing here about water impacts, and so I do not like this, and that we should say something that
Which is why
any
we
blasting
need to
shall
get to
be,
that place.
a plan shall, be provided, and the Board of Health shall review it, so.
And if we reviewed it and disagreed with it, would it then go to ZBA to adjudicate it in the context of being a 40?
Oh, all this is going to go through ZBA, so
Okay.
these comments will go to ZBA, and they will decide
Right.
if they want to entertain.
Yeah, but it certainly seems like,
And
given
then-
what we know.
Yes,
and the piece
yeah.
of, like,
It's
this is
like,
where there
wait
is
a minute.
Yeah.
But if we were to enact a regulation, we
A
could give
bylaw?
it, a regulation.
A regulation,
No,
yeah.
because a bylaw.
Oh, yeah, that's for the
Right.
town.
So if we were to enact a regulation. we
They would
could-
need to comply
We could
with it.
just, correct, but we could give it to ZBA and just say, here's what we just did. if it's relevant in this case.
But I don't think you could say,
No,
I've
not
enacted a
after-
regulation
Yeah.
for a project that's in progress.
Yeah.
But I think we could give the guidance to
I'm not
say.
thinking it for regulatory purposes.
No, but
Now,
I don't
now,
we don't even need a
to
regulation. We
increase
can
their-
say, David looked at this with New Hampshire and blasting is
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah. Oh,
So
I'm thinking
we,
to
you should be
increase their
concerned about
awareness
blasting
of
ZBA.
potential impacts and things that can be done as
Yeah.
preventive measures, that's all.
No, but
Not-
I think we should share that in the absence of a bylaw or a
Right.
regulation
Yeah.
based on the insights gained by the board.
Let's just say that right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so that should be part of the communication as per.
So, did you hear what I said, Ellen? Okay, something that, with respect to item 12, construction blasting, that the Board of Health recommends that if blasting is proposed, that a plan be prepared and that we review in the context of ensuring protection of, or prevention of impacts to groundwater. Something like that.
And we should also specify with pre-work baseline,
We can't do that yet.
we can't do
Let's
that
just-
yet. Okay,
because
sorry.
But we'll review it.
And the chance,
And this is a
getting the
letter,
plan for review gives us the opportunity.
Exactly.
to make
We can get into the
comment.
specifics.
and this is a letter to ZBA.
Yes.
Is it, do we need to put it in a letter, or do we
Or
just
a
provide them
memo.
comments? or-
Yeah.
Yeah, something,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if the board,
It'd be a haiku.
and just back to dust control for a minute, if you've been by there and noticed, they are using a spray-type mulch over their large stockpile of dirt there. They also sprayed the lawn too, so as long as the dust control is done by that way, I don't see an issue either.
Right, I'm just asking for clarity for
Yeah.
things, you
No,
know.
that's
So
fine.
what you propose doesn't actually comply with the regulations,
Yeah,
and so we think you should comply with the actual
yeah,
law.
let's just, or just be explicit, let's articulate,
Yeah.
this is what the
Right, I think
regulation
we need to
says.
be
How about calcium salts? I know they say no road salt, but typically sometimes a contractor, I don't think you'll have to worry here because it's already paved, but typically when you have unpaved surfaces for travel, sometimes you'll see calcium salts put down.
Well, it said no road
Yeah.
salt, I think
I
that
think I
covered
would
it.
say if the salt isn't intended for the application for ice melting, you said they're both salts.
Yeah, it just says
So
no,
that's-
no
that's fine.
salt.
So we'll just leave it at that?
Yeah, I think
just
that's
say-
okay.
So wetting
Say no
is the way
salt,
to
we
go,
agree.
or if they want them mulched
It's a
outside.
perfectly flat circular driveway too.
Yeah, they already got it paved? It's pretty good, actually.
ZBA,
Yeah.
ZBA, do we need to comment on ZBA?
What is that? What's the ZBA petition, something?
Yeah, I don't know what these are.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what that was.
It came, and the first
Oh,
four,
those.
These here.
Okay.
three are renewals, but the fourth one, you should probably look at. Now, it says for living accommodations. This is the day spa building.
Well, presently upstairs, when I've inspected it, they only have use for massage therapy and so forth.
But now
So-
they've got
I
used
asked
for Igor.
for if they had a floor plan of what they were proposing, and they have not submitted it yet.
So I
This
think-
is
Does that change the septic?
So this is
It could,
all.
and that's why we need to see
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that
Flows
can't,
will
right,
change.
that cannot go ahead
Right,
without review
right.
by the Board of
So,
Health.
Right.
It's like, no, it's totally cool.
and so
17 bedrooms up there.
the change in use,
So
they'll
this is the
need to,
41 North Main.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the change in use will require a septic review and a building proposal review. So it shouldn't be
Yeah.
automatic.
Sure.
So the ZBA should know that prior, they shouldn't approve this prior to our approval.
But we should communicate that to the ZBA, as we
Yes.
haven't received the
Yes.
material necessary for us to approve.
So what did you say, Mark? The
They
sep-
need to
the change
submit
in
the,
use
well, you were right
will
on.
require
They-
a review of the septic?
Septic system design flow to determine the change in use will be sufficient. So to determine if the septic system design flow will be sufficient for the change in use. And you were right, too, to require the floor plans. You can't tell what they're gonna have up there. It wasn't, I have to check the septic to see if it even was designed for residential.
Well, if it, I mean, I guess if it wasn't designed for residential, but had the requisite, oh, go ahead.
I know, I had pulled the file and left it for you.
Well, I just haven't gone to the
I
office.
looked at it earlier. It was originally designed for a four-bedroom residents,
that's
I think in
Still
2003.
doing that.
And then they came, they,
This was the spa.
they did, they came to the board and a change in use for
This is the
to the
kitchen.
day spa was approved.
Gallonage didn't change any?
The gallonage did not change.
Okay, so we'll see.
But so if you have, but if you
Now
say the
you have
gallon
mixed
didn't
use.
change, but you're like, yep, it was the same for the day spa, and now I'm adding back bedrooms.
Yeah, so now it could be,
Yes.
true, that's why we have to make sure, now we have to check the square footage of the design flow for the salon,
Depends on where the
Yeah.
records
and we have to check the
left off.
square footage of the
Make sure that the
house,
incremental
the
combination-
Is that
room
driven by
count.
Title V? So is the salon Title V usage pattern, since we don't have independent Sherborn regs, and then we would superimpose the residential space independently?
It would be added
It's
to the-
incremental, yeah.
Yeah.
It's additive.
And so it's a question of if they have excessive capacity, if they've got residual capacity from the spa use, they could apply that to a compliant home use.
True, as long
But
as
then
it,
for
as
us,
long
we
as you
have to
don't go
figure out
over.
like what the room count is, and if it's all above the second floor, like, I don't know.
Oh,
that we've
that's
got-
true.
like, again, it's like, that
You're
gets
gonna-
tricky, because all these rooms are above the second floor, but the first floor is a commercial space, so the applicability of our primarily residential criteria feels different if you're like, the whole place is above the second floor.
True, it's like it's a second floor
Yeah, but does it
apartment.
get monitored by DEP?
I don't think so.
No, but if, as a salon, they have to have a tight tank if they're doing any chemical use such as permanents and colors.
They're doing colors.
Acetone.
No, not on either, no. Nobody goes to this color.
It didn't take, Matt. I got some bad
Nobody goes to this
news.
color. My kids gave me this color, I'm
Lot of
keeping
us
it.
have
Yeah.
It's in.
Yeah.
Could I ask about this 125 Coolidge?
Well, they said it's all good now.
Oh, yeah, that's done.
Yeah,
He
that's
renewed
awesome.
his,
Okay.
so I took it
Oh,
off the
fantastic.
final
Seems
agenda.
That the
It's not.
letter that went out to them was enough and sufficient for them to think twice.
Yeah. So, we have to warrants and payroll and minutes?
And I gotta go get those
And any
plans.
agenda items?
Yeah, get those
you know, For
going.
the next
Yeah,
meeting?
I'll go get the plans.
What if, the mounding study update?
That was me forgetting to.
But that'd be next meeting, that's next meeting's agenda.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just finalizing.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal.
What am I
Okay.
doing, signing?
I just
meeting?
forgot.
I had something I was thinking about for today, but no, couldn't do today. When I remember it, I will tell you. If and when I remember it.
Number 9.
Okay, so Rick, if we just have signing of things and minutes, so you may terminate whenever you like.
Do the front page.
Okay, I think I got this one. So